keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Phil Kearsey is bringing a new flavour to the Michelin-starred restaurant Pied à Terre as he becomes its new executive head chef. Customers can expect a menu that showcases modern British cooking, accompanied by classical French roots, which uses hyper-seasonal ingredients. What are hyper-seasonal ingredients? That's an interesting phrase.
It's more about just reacting to the seasonality of everything. We like to change the menu all the time. So basically, I surround myself with the best suppliers, and they tell me what's amazing at the moment, and then we try and celebrate that in the restaurant in many different forms, using taste, texture and technique, and just try and celebrate something as humble as a broccoli stem or a cauliflower, using absolutely everything, and making sure we've got an ever-changing menu, so letting the seasons dictate, so it's never boring and we never get menu fatigue.
OK, your career has taken you around the world a bit.
Yeah.
For example, you were in the United States. What did you learn there?
So, well, every chef I've worked for, it's about to take something from. A lot of chefs will go places and just stay in one establishment and get to the top, and then that's it. I've kind of then went to another chef to learn completely different things. That's the brilliant thing, to be able to surround myself with such amazing chefs throughout my career, because I've learned different things from all of them. And you find out 5 different ways to do something, and you find the way that you like it the best. And it's also about understanding it takes a while to understand how the restaurant is, going through the history of all these amazing chefs that have been before me, the style, because it needs to make sense. You wouldn't have a dish that should be at the Fat Duck and then a dish that should be at the Waterside, you know. You need to make sure that it all makes sense and it goes together with the decor, the service, the wine serving. And so we want to be the restaurant, not that does a little bit of everything, we want to be the best French restaurant in London, you know.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
A very good afternoon to you. Slightly later, but it's the 3 o'clock, top of the hour with me, Martin Daubney on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. Now, in around about 15 minutes' time, Kemi Badenoch is expected to give a surprise speech on immigration. And GB News will cover the speech live and then drill the leader of the opposition afterwards. And the convicted terrorist who helped radicalise Manchester Arena bomber Salman Abedi has been released from jail early, with his probation officers claiming he is still a high risk and intends to commit terrorist-related offending. Is it time for the Justice Secretary to intervene and put him back in jail? And BBC staff are being urged to wear Palestinian colours and, of course, their Palestinian scarves for a workplace day of action tomorrow. But Jewish groups have slammed it as a shocking attack on Jews. I'll be joined by a former furious BBC staffer who says the BBC should be impartial. This is a disgrace. That's all coming up in your next hour. Welcome to the show now. Top story today. After 120 glorious years, the Vauxhall car plant in Luton has sadly closed, with owner Stellantis claiming it was killed by net zero. Labour's Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds called it a dark day for Luton. But was it the punitive green targets of Labour and the Tories before them that actually turned off the lights and have put over 1,100 people's jobs now at grave risk? Well, as a result of the government has announced it will review its eco rules on electric vehicle sales following the backlash over the factory closure, which has been linked to sluggish EV sales and the financial penalties, of course, imposed on manufacturers if EV sales don't make up less than 22% of their total sales. Well, earlier today, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves was asked about this, and this is what she had to say.
We're committed to the 2030 target for phasing out the purchase of new petrol and diesel cars. But it is really important within that to make sure that we get the balance right and proper support for the automotive sector, for the car industry in Britain. We've just launched a consultation to look at the plans that we inherited from the previous government, which would have meant fines for businesses that didn't sell a proportion of electric vehicles, because we want to keep investment, we want to keep jobs in Britain, and that's why we're launching this consultation.
Well, let's cross live now to Luton, the scene of the crime, as it were, where GBNews reporter Adam Cherry is at the Vauxhall factory. Adam, welcome to the show. So Jonathan Reynolds called it a dark day for Luton, but many people feel it was the politicians, it was the net zero zealots that have turned off the lights. What's the mood on the ground?
Yeah, there's a lot of finger-pointing going on in Westminster today, isn't there, Martin? But when you're here on the ground, you feel the human element of this, and you speak to people who say that this plant and this community, it's the bedrock of the economy, and if you don't work there, you know someone who does. 1,100 jobs at risk. Those which are saved will be shipped off over to It's not the same place as Luton, and you know, families will be split up, and it'll have a huge effect across the community. Now, I spoke to some people earlier today I asked them, what do you think about this? How's it going to affect you, and how's it going to affect Luton? And this is what they had to say.
It's always a massive part of Luton, and if this is the last 1,100 jobs to go, you know, it's a bit of a death knell for the town, I think. It's not great.
You know, to buy an electric car, you need to take out a mortgage, don't you? And not everyone is going to do it.
My husband worked there for years, and it's everyone you know is somebody that has actually worked there, so it is going to be a big loss, definitely.
This is the effect of it, isn't it? If you demand that car companies sell electric vehicles of which there's relatively low demand, and then every year amp up that mandate and say you need to sell more and more of these, consequences are this. In April, this plant is going to close entirely after being open for 120 years. So, of course, people are very angry here, Martin, as you see from that footage.
Adam Cherry, first we kiss goodbye to the coal mines, then the steel plants, the shipbuilding yards, and now our motor industry going down the U-bend. Sad day. Adam Cherry there at the Vauxhall plant in Luton. Thank you very, very much for joining us on GB News. And join me now is the motor trade expert, Fraser Brown. Fraser, welcome to the show. Let's be honest, the government is trying to force people to buy cars they simply don't want. And the result of that now is the British motor industry is shedding thousands of jobs. And that is something we're seeing echoed across the entire European continent. Billions and billions of pounds being wiped off the industry, thousands of jobs down the toilet because they're trying to force us to buy electric cars that nobody seems to want.
Yeah, it's been a very, very difficult time over the last few years for the British motor industry. And this Labour government is insisting on changing the deadline for banning petrol and diesel cars from being 2035, which we've all been working towards for a long time, to 2030. So what does that really mean for average consumers? Well, it actually means that you are very unlikely to be able to buy a petrol or diesel car new next time you change your car, because at the moment we're working towards a 2035 deadline, and that 2035 deadline means that this year 23% of all cars registered have to be zero-emission vehicles. And next year, that moves to 28%. And that's based on us phasing out completely petrol and diesel vehicles by 2035. The Labour government is moving that to 2030. So that means that next year it won't be 28%, it'll be well over a third will have to be zero-emission vehicles. So over time, customers are going to find that they cannot buy a petrol or diesel car within 2 or 3 years as a new car, because manufacturers are restricting supply, because effectively the government is rationing petrol and diesel cars. We will only be able to purchase zero-emission vehicles in the very, very near future.
Fraser, what's happening? Like Ford today. They're begging the government to give tax breaks, to give incentives. We saw similar things in the past. I was one of the mugs who scrapped my petrol car and bought a diesel car because politicians back in the day, Gordon Brown, told me that was the right thing to do. Now I get charged £12.50 a day to use it. People want a carrot, not a stick. They're trying to be mandated to buy these things, and it's simply not working. Does the government have to do a radical rethink on its strategy?
I think changing from 2035 as the deadline to 2030, we're an industry. This industry takes 7 to 10 years to develop a vehicle. This industry, it's a very, very long period of time of research and development, building a vehicle, getting the supply chain in place to supply all the tooling that goes onto a production line, and working. The industry is sick of dealing with uncertainties. And what the Labour government has done, in addition to what it did with the budget, is also really cripple the motor industry in this country by imposing this 2030 deadline, which, if I'm entirely honest with you, I don't think we can get there. And the people that they will impact more than anybody, this is a Labour government own goal. The people that will be impacted more than anybody is those that do not have their own driveways, because an electric vehicle is more expensive to buy new, but it's much cheaper to run if you can access domestic overnight charging. So if you can plug your car in on your drive at night, then you can have a much lower cost to actually drive your vehicle, because it will cost you about 2 pence a mile, because it's only 7 pence per kilowatt to charge your vehicle overnight. If you do not have domestic overnight charging, so if you live in a terraced house, an economy home, possibly a flat, then you will not have access to plugging your car into your domestic electricity supply. So you'll pay between 60 and 80 pence per kilowatt. That's almost the same price as driving a petrol car if you have to use public charging facilities. So about a third of the UK population do not have access to a driveway where they can access domestic charging. And as a result of that, they cannot get this lower cost ownership, and they're not going to want to pay way over the odds for an electric vehicle. Now, on the flip side, there are small businesses like this little business here in Richmond, in Yorkshire, who are selling used electric vehicles. Now, if you take something like a Jaguar I-Pace or a Tesla Model 3, when they become 3 years old, they're almost exactly the same price as a 3-year-old petrol or diesel car. If you then plug them into domestic overnight charging, it becomes probably the best value for money motoring you can get, because you could almost offset all of your monthly payments on your fuel savings. So there are real wins with electric cars, and they are right for an awful lot of people. But right now, with this change, in an industry that needs long-term security, the change that the Labour government has imposed upon the industry is causing huge distress. I mean, there's more than £2 billion gone into subsidising getting electric vehicles into the marketplace to encourage retail consumers to adopt them, because retail consumers at the moment simply are not moving towards electric vehicles. The only part of the market that is corporate buyers, because there are huge tax incentives for them. So I am calling, as are many people in our industry, for this Labour government to come forward with some support, maybe 50% off VAT on electric vehicles, maybe abolish VAT on electric vehicles. We also need to see a significant saving. We maybe should have price parity on charging with VAT on public chargers, the same price it is for VAT and domestic setting, because we only pay 7% on domestic energy, whereas we pay 20% on chargers out in the public environment.
All right, Fraser, we have to leave it there. You certainly know your onions. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think we're going to end up like Cuba. I think people are going to buy petrol cars in 2030 and they're going to keep them on the road forever. And they're going to maintain, they're going to make do and make good. And guess what? People won't buy new cars, and there we go. There'll be more compounding of the death spiral on the British motor industry. Fraser Brown, you really know your stuff. Thank you very much for joining us here on GB News this afternoon. Now get ready, because it's time now for our biggest and greatest Great British giveaway this year, and your chance to win 50 grand in tax-free cash. 50k. It's the biggest cash prize that we've ever given away. It could all be yours. And here's the details that you'll need to win that whopping, juicy 50 grand.
It's our festive treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £50,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest ever Great British giveaway. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements, or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion. For your chance to win £50,000 cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Philly Boots. Now, the Home Office has told GB News it has robust measures in place to manage the risk posed by terrorist offenders released early from prison. And this follows the news that a convicted terrorist believed to have groomed the Manchester Arena bomber has been freed from jail yesterday, despite serious concerns that he'll reoffend. Adel Rauf Abdallah was released yesterday, less than 2 months after the parole board denied him previously an early release, claiming he still posed a high risk of serious harm to the public. Well, joining me now to try and make sense of this is our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, welcome to the show. We hear about the early release of prisoners all the time. We're often told, have no fear, it won't be anybody that can pose a threat to the great British public. Here we are, a convicted terrorist believed to have groomed the Manchester Arena bomber, still a high risk. He's been let out. What on earth is going on?
Yeah, I mean, the difference here, though, Martin, is that he is not an early release, and that's why the authorities cannot do anything about this, even though they know this individual poses a high risk of harm to members of the public because he has completed his sentence. He was jailed in 2016 for encouraging and funding extremists to go over and fight with the Islamic State terror group in Syria and Iraq, jailed for around about 9 years. He was released in 2021. He went on to reoffend again, made threats to an individual, and then was taken back to jail to complete his sentence. Now, he tried, as you mentioned there, to get early release a couple of months early, just 2 months ago. But the parole board, in examining his case, concluded that he still posed a significant risk to the public and denied him that parole. However, his sentence is now complete. That jail term is handed down by the judge is over. There's nothing the authorities can do other than try to put in place measures, Martin, that will deal with this individual and try to keep an eye on him and restrict his internet use and perhaps his movements around whatever local area he's living in. And he is of concern because he was a childhood friend of the Manchester Arena bomber Salman Abedi. He is mentioned in the official Manchester Arena bombing inquiry report as someone who they believe had radicalised and groomed Salman Abedi before he then went on to carry out this horrific attack on that Ariana Grande concert. So he is a player of some significance and someone that the authorities are understandably very concerned about.
And can anything be done here? Can there be an intervention, an injection of common sense? Robert Jenrick today has said that the Justice Secretary must intervene. Is there any way that there can be an intervention to try and get this guy, who clearly still represents a threat, back behind bars?
Well, I think we're beyond really what the Justice Secretary can do without a change in the law to provide tougher sentences. And with this individual, it's too late for that. He was sentenced by a judge. He has served that. So he's now back out on the streets. It's all about trying to manage him. But there is not a theoretical risk out there. There is a real risk out there because we've seen it before, Martin. You just need to think back a few years to the Fishmongers' Hall attack on London Bridge. That was a terrorist called Usman Khan, who was approaching the end of his term in prison. He was on a rehabilitation course event at Fishmongers' Hall when he attacked and stabbed to death 2 of the workers at that programme event before himself being shot dead. And then just a few weeks, a month or 2 after that, we had another terrorist attack carried out by Sudesh Aman, who was another terrorist prisoner just released the previous day from prison. This time the authorities were very concerned about him and followed him in Streatham in South London, but were unable to stop him stabbing 2 people because he just dashed into a hardware store, grabbed a big kitchen knife and then started stabbing people in the high street. The police managed to shoot him dead, but as I say, not before he had killed or injured, I should say, 2 people. So it's not a theoretical risk that these prisoners who have been convicted of terrorist offences and are being released pose. There is a real world risk that they pose to members of the public.
It's just an astonishing case. 22 young people blown up at Manchester Arena. This guy was chief amongst the radicalisers of Salman Abedi. His own parole officers, psychologists, prison officers clearly saying he still remains a high risk. A lot of people are going to be scratching their heads, Mark White, and thinking the lunatics have taken over the asylum. Thank you very, very much for bringing us up to date. Home and Security Editor there, Mark White, excellent as ever. There's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock, including we're expected to hear from Tory leader Kemi Badenoch and the Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp for an announcement, we think, on immigration that's imminent. But before that, here's your headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. It's 3:33. These are your headlines from the GB newsroom. Making everything worse, that's a charge from Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, accusing Sir Keir Starmer of dodging the Chancellor's pledge not to raise taxes or borrow more in the future. In a fiery exchange at Prime Minister's questions, Sir Keir Starmer hit back, saying the leader of the opposition wanted all the benefits of the budget without explaining how she'd pay for it.
2 weeks ago, she stood there and said that she wanted all the investment, all the benefits of the budget, but she didn't know how she was going to pay for it. I noticed that having come here criticising the national insurance rises over and over again, on Monday, she admitted that she wouldn't reverse the position that we set out. Meanwhile, her science minister was saying he was going energetically to do the opposite. They really haven't got a clue what they're doing.
In response to rules from the Labour benches, Kemi Badenoch suggested Sir Keir Starmer should resign over what she described as Labour's lies.
If he wants to know what Conservatives would do, he should resign and find out. Until then, I'm the one asking the questions. There's a petition out there, 2 million people asking him to go. He's the one who doesn't know. He's the one who doesn't know how things work. It is not government that creates growth, Mr. Speaker. It is business.
In other news, roads and railways across the country have been hit by flooding and various stations evacuated as Storm Connell drenched southern England with up to half a month's rain. In London, King's Cross Station was forced to shut due to overcrowding, with commuters describing absolute mayhem at the station. Trains have also been unable to stop at platforms at Euston Underground Station. More than 90 flood warnings are still in place across the UK, including a severe alert for Billing Aquadrome in Northamptonshire, where flooding poses a danger to life. Now, a man from Bradford has been arrested on suspicion of stalking and harassment after videos of women on nights out in Manchester went viral. Greater Manchester Police say the footage shows women being followed, harassed and, in some cases, subjected to upskirting. It's believed to be the first arrest in the UK linked to videos accessible behind paywalls on social media platforms. Officers say the content has caused fear among women in the city, but extra patrols are in place to keep people safe over the festive season. Police are urging anyone affected to contact them. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2645 and €1.1990. The price of gold is £2,089.44 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 8,270 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Welcome back, and we've got some live pictures for you now. In a short while, we're expecting an announcement from Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative Party leader, and also the Conservative Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. In fact, here's Kemi Badenoch now about to make that speech. Let's go over live.
Tomorrow, immigration figures will be released that should show a drop in net migration. This is because of the changes we made in the last year of the Conservative government. The figures we saw for 2023 were astonishing. They highlighted a big problem we must be honest about. Even if we see a decline in tomorrow's data, the fact is immigration, both legal and illegal, is too high. Migration affects all of our lives in different ways. It certainly affected mine, and that is why I am happy to speak about it without fear. I believe our country is a beacon of light that shines all over the world, a place of security, opportunity, and prosperity, where people are treated equally. Millions want to come here, but we as politicians have to do right by the citizens of this country before anyone else. Our country cannot sustain the numbers we have seen. We are reducing the quality of life for people already here because immigration is at a pace too fast to maintain public services, and at a rate where it is next to impossible to integrate those from radically different cultures. It is time to tell the truth. For decades, the entire political class in this country has presided over mass migration. Since 1994, every year has seen more people arrive in this country than leave. Numbers climbed and climbed. During the last Conservative administration, we promised to bring numbers down. We did not deliver that promise. We ended free movement, but the system that replaced it is not working. Some of the increase in migration was for humanitarian reasons that few would disagree with, taking in refugees from Ukraine and British overseas nationals from Hong Kong. But that was not the whole story. We may have tried to control numbers, but overall, we did not deliver. Under my leadership, we are learning from our mistakes, and it is time for a new approach. We need to change. Let's break it down. First, if immigration is too quick, there is no integration. The ties that bind us start to fray. It doesn't matter whether you're massively for immigration or massively against it. Without a shared national identity, our country will suffer. When people come here, they must buy into the values, customs, and institutions that attracted them here in the first place. Second, the political class cannot pretend that immigration comes only with benefits and no costs. When we can all see the pressure on housing, roads, GPs, and wages, we must be honest. The failure of politics over the last 30 years has been to gloss over it or make it a fringe issue. That has to stop. Third, we can no longer be naive. It's nonsense that we have allowed a situation where judges deem safe countries to be unsafe, where loopholes are willfully exploited by opportunists, where the latest legal ruses and wheezes are sent around the world on social media. Now, as I have said, tomorrow's figures will likely show a reduction in net immigration. And no doubt the new government will try to take credit for that reduction. But that change is due to the reforms that the Conservatives made in our final months in power. For example, over the last 18 months, income thresholds for work visas increased by 50%. Restrictions were placed on care workers and students bringing family members into the country. Labour may criticise our record on immigration, but remember, throughout the last 14 years, the Labour Party were urging us to relax controls on immigration. Even though those figures tomorrow are likely to be a start in the right direction, it's not enough. We remain a world away from where we need to be. Labour won't get us there. Under a Labour government, immigration will remain far too high. We are already seeing the signs. For example, the last Conservative government committed to increasing the income threshold which a family must earn to bring relatives to the UK. This reform alone was estimated to cut net migration dramatically, but the Labour government have suspended that change. The Home Secretary wants a returns agreement with the EU, but that's the exact kind of agreement that saw us take more asylum seekers than were returned to the continent. So Labour won't change anything. The Prime Minister himself once said that there is a racist undercurrent which permeates all immigration law. And of course, he and his cabinet fought against the end of free movement. They scrapped the Rwanda deterrent before it had even started. And we are already seeing the inevitable result as more and more people cross the channel, with significantly more arriving than last year. Labour have no serious plan for ending illegal migration. As the former head of the Border Force has pointed out, enforcement on its own will never solve the problem. People know that if they can make it to the UK, they will be able to stay. We must end that. The result of Labour's policies will be consistently high illegal immigration throughout this Parliament and insufficient action on legal migration. But we are not in government now. We are the opposition, and our role now is to hold the government to account. Our government's primary responsibility must be to its own citizens. Yes, economists sometimes argue that immigration can increase a country's wealth, but they are not thinking about the effect on individual people. In government, there's little detailed analysis about the impact of different types of immigration on living standards or on wage levels. There's even less analysis on the pressure on public services or housing or the welfare system as a result of mass migration. Sometimes there's even a squeamishness about discussing the negative aspects of immigration. This is not just a question of money, it's a question of fairness. And perhaps most importantly, most British citizens don't want to change what's good about our country. Even those who have recently arrived don't want to change these things. They came here because of what our country is, a secure and free society. Most people want to preserve that. So we need a new approach. We will not accept the claim that we can only deliver growth by accepting mass migration. We need a new approach which will mean that young people can build their lives in a country which does not have these pressures on housing and public services. And a new approach that starts by asking why government doesn't seem to be able to deliver that. The answer is because the system is broken. And until you accept that, any politician, all politicians are doomed to fail. We have to get the diagnosis right. So, we will review every policy, treaty, and part of our legal framework, including the ECHR and the Human Rights Act. And in designing our detailed policies, we will put the following elements at the core. A strict numerical cap, with visas only for those who will make a substantial and clear overall contribution. A fully transparent approach, publishing all the data, so that for the first time, everyone can see the real costs and benefits of different types of migration. A reconsidered approach to citizenship and settlement, making the path to a British passport a privilege to be earned, not an automatic right. Zero tolerance for foreign criminals remaining in the UK. And, of course, an effective deterrent for illegal migration. Overall, our plans will look at all immigration routes, family, study, asylum and work, and at all ways people can enter the UK. We will look at the access of migrants and any dependents to welfare and public services. And we will need to improve the data and economic modelling that decision makers rely on. But I want to end on something very simple. We can argue about the effects of migration on the economy, we can discuss the impact on public services and housing, and we haven't done that enough. But fundamentally, this country is not a dormitory or a hotel. It is our home. We need to look after it. I want to rebuild the trust between the Conservative Party and the British people. I know we have a lot of work to do, but the first step is to accept that mistakes were made and to learn from them. As the new party leader, I want to acknowledge that we made mistakes. Yes, some of these problems are long-standing. This is a collective failure of political leaders from all parties over decades. But on behalf of the Conservative Party, it is right that I, as the new leader, accept responsibility and say truthfully, we got this wrong. I more than understand the public anger on this issue. I share it. The Conservatives will develop a detailed plan for immigration to put before the British public before the next election. They will have a clear choice: the policies of Labour, which are doomed to fail, or a new, coherent plan. It's time to tell the truth on immigration. And over the coming months, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Thank you.
Great, well, thank you, Kemi, for that. Let me start by saying, as the new Shadow Home Secretary, that over decades, under successive governments, immigration has been far too high. Since 2010, net migration added 3.7 million people to our population. That is more than the population of the whole of Wales. It is the equivalent of 8 cities the size of Liverpool. Annual net migration has recently exceeded 700,000 and gross arrival numbers reached 1.2 million. Immigration at this scale is not acceptable, and the public agrees. 64% think immigration is too high, just 6% think immigration is too low. And Professor Brian Bell, the chair of the Independent Migration Advisory Committee, described recent levels of immigration as, and I quote, unsustainable. Professor Bell is right. High immigration has placed huge strain on housing, with net migration creating demand for 120,000 new homes per year. Public services like healthcare, education and transport are under strain, but it matters for our society too. Because for a nation to succeed, we need to be united in our values and share a sense of national identity and culture. And the truth is, this is undermined when large-scale immigration occurs, especially without integration. Speaking honestly, I am troubled that over 1 million people in the UK, over 1 million people, can't speak English either well or at all. For some nationalities, adult workforce participation is at or below 50%, with even more stark differences for women. In some parts of London, over a third of the population is relatively newly arrived, and in one part of East London, 73% of school children do not speak English as a first language. Now, these are real issues caused by high immigration without integration. Now, you often hear people, including government bodies, saying that we need immigration for workers and for economic growth. But the truth is, the vast majority of recent arrivals did not come here to work. Only 15%, just 1 in 7, of non-EU visas in the last 5 years were issued primarily for work purposes. And even there, for every worker who arrived, on average they brought an extra dependent along with them. Huge numbers of visas were issued for study and for family, with only a minority of those ending up in work. And even for those who were in work, they were often earning very low wages. In 2022-23, around half of those who arrived on worker visa routes were earning barely more than the minimum wage. And 68% of migrants here working, 68% earned less than median earnings. And this should concern us because recent OBR analysis showed that low-wage migrant workers are fiscally negative. That means they cost other taxpayers more than they contribute for every single year of their life. Now, of course, we should welcome limited numbers of high-skilled workers who contribute financially or who fill genuine skill gaps. Research scientists in financial services, in technology, medicine, engineering, we like engineers, and in advanced manufacturing. This can work for us. But mass low-skilled migration actually reduces productivity and makes public finances worse. So, rather than businesses reaching for large numbers of cheap migrant workers to fill low-skilled vacancies, we want those businesses instead to invest more in cutting-edge, labour-saving technology and mechanisation. And our competitor economies, places like Australia, like South Korea and Singapore, are doing this already in sectors from agriculture to construction to healthcare, and we in the UK can do the same. Now, it's also very relevant that over 9 million adults are economically inactive. That is an increase of around 10%, an increase of 850,000 since the pandemic. So businesses urgently need to recruit those people back into the workforce instead of importing low-wage migrant workers. And the government needs to make sure those people have the right skills and that the benefit system is toughened up to incentivise work. Now, as Kemi said, there is one thing we know for sure in all this. We can't trust Labour on immigration. They have already suspended the last Conservative government's measures to further tighten up the rules around legal migration that had been due to come into force in April of next year. Almost as soon as they were elected, they cancelled the Rwanda deterrent before it had even started, leading to a 23% increase in small boat crossings since the election, compared to the same time last year. And in opposition, Labour voted 134 times against measures to toughen up on illegal migration, including voting against tougher prison sentences for the people smuggling gangs they claim to want to smash. And Labour MPs and ministers now seem reluctant to talk much about immigration at all. The truth is, they don't have the answers. Now, by contrast, Conservatives in government did take some steps to reduce net migration, and as Kemi said, we may see the early effects of that in tomorrow's figures. But it is also true that we need to go much further and take tougher measures, as Kemi set out a few minutes ago. And those tougher measures will include a hard cap on numbers and zero tolerance for illegal migration. So with a new leader, the Conservatives will develop a new approach. We will now take the time needed to develop a carefully thought-through plan that we know will work. It'll be a plan that will deliver what the British people are asking for. And now I think there are some questions from the media with us today. I believe starting with Joe Pike from the BBC, who I can see, I think, lurking by the screen at the back.
Joe Pike, BBC News. Two things, Kemi Badenoch. Firstly, you talked about providing an effective deterrent. Is it still your party's policy to reintroduce the Rwanda scheme? And secondly, you'll have heard at PMQ's Keir Starmer not rule out a law to ban criticism of prophets. What's your take on possible blasphemy laws?
Okay. So on the deterrent, we still believe that a deterrent is necessary as part of a proper immigration policy. And it is not just us that thinks this. You know, Ursula von der Leyen has said that offshore processing is going to be required. Now, we don't know where we're going to be in 4 years' time. It may be that there have been changes between what the Rwandan government was offering that we put out, but we certainly still want a deterrent. We would not have cancelled the Rwanda plan before it had even got started like Labour did. And I'm against blasphemy laws.
Yeah, and on the deterrent point, the National Crime Agency have said that you need a deterrent in order to stop the boats. Simply law enforcement alone, although it's important, and of course it was happening under the previous government, that alone will not work. And that is why we've seen that 23% increase year on year in small boat crossings since the election. It's because the deterrent was cancelled before it even started. And as Kemi said, the Labour government are out of step with where the rest of the world is heading, with even Ursula von der Leyen calling for offshore processing. OK, I think next we have Chris Hope from GB News.
Thank you, Chris Hope. Kemi Badenoch, you said there you got it wrong on immigration. Chris Phillips said we can't trust Labour on immigration, but why on earth should voters trust either of you two or your entire party for completely cocking up controlling net migration for the past 14 years. Why would you say today, for example, that the firm cap will be fewer than 100,000 arrivals a year?
So we're not setting out numbers because you've got to build that in to a full plan. What we have set out today is a framework for how we're going to be carrying out our immigration policy and how we are going to be holding Labour to account. It's not good enough just to complain about what they're doing. We have to explain why it is the wrong way of going about things. But you asked, why should people trust us? To earn back trust, you need to acknowledge where you got things wrong. And we are acknowledging today that while we may have tried, we did not deliver. We brought in a points-based system, which I personally thought was going to only allow skilled migrants in, and instead it allowed a lot of people at low incomes and with dependents. So we are going to change that. But we want people to know that we recognise their frustration, and in many cases, certainly in mine, we share it. Thank you. Next question.
Great. So next is Steve from The Times, Steve Swinford.
Do you still see leaving the ECHR as an easy answer, or is that something you're more open to now? I know you spoke about reviewing.
OK, and that was the bold new plan from Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch and new Conservative Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp. Absolutely a kind of damage limitation announcement, you have to feel, because, of course, immigration figures are due out tomorrow. And as Kemi Badenoch kept saying, we're expecting to see a downturn in those figures. And she's keen to say it was the Tories what done it. So the numbers are down and she's claiming credit for that, and then went on to set out it's time for a new approach, she said, despite the Conservatives, of course, having 14 years in power to actually do any of this. Let's have a quick reaction to this now with Olivia Utley, our political correspondent who joins us in the studio. Olivia, you and I watched that. My jaw was on the floor. I was doing quite a lot of gesticulating at the television. Quite simply, a lot of that, I think I've heard it all before, and as I kept saying, they were in power for 14 years. They had every opportunity to do all of this, to get the numbers down, the political class being completely out of touch with the public on immigration. Loopholes are exploited. We put restrictions on care workers, on dependents, but the numbers were still high. And it just seemed to me that this was yet more promises.
Well, I think what makes things really difficult for Kemi Badenoch is she wasn't just a Conservative MP in the last Parliament. She was actually the business secretary. She was very high up in government. She had a seat at the cabinet table. So, as you say, it's quite difficult for her to make the speech just 6 months after the Tories lost power, having been in power for 14 years, essentially saying that the immigration system is a mess. Kemi Badenoch doesn't particularly like doing media appearances. The reason why she's doing this is because she wants to get ahead of the curve. We are expecting to hear these immigration figures tomorrow, and we are expecting them to be down. To be fair to her, she is probably right that the vast effect of these immigration figures being down is because of work that the Conservatives did when they were in power. There will be a lag effect to that, which does beg the question yet again of why Rishi Sunak didn't call an election later in the year. Why did he go for July when we knew that interest rates were going down, immigration figures would be down? If the election was in a couple of weeks' time, perhaps the picture would have been very, very different indeed. In terms of the substance of that speech from Kemi Badenoch, she talked, there were lots of lines which were very, very Kemi in style, saying that that Britain is not a dormitory or a hotel, it is our home. I intend to keep it that way. She said she more than understands the anger that the public feel on this issue. She feels that anger too. Really, really strong rhetoric there. But in terms of what she's actually going to do, well, again, she talked about reviewing the ECHR. Lots and lots of politicians have said that before. Rishi Sunak, in fact, said that he would review the ECHR, and it never really came to anything. In fact, during the Conservative leadership contest, it was mostly, you had to have a pretty strong verdict one way or the other. And, of course, Robert Jenkin, who was Kemi Badenoch's final rival, said that he would get Britain out of the ECHR. Kemi didn't go that far. She said that she'd introduce a strict numerical cap. Well, again, that's something that goes down very, very well with the sort of Tory basis, and I think with quite a lot of people in the country. But she failed to say exactly what that cap would be. She said that it's not the time to do that yet, and she said that before the next election, the Conservatives would lay out in more detail. That is 4 years away. That doesn't really seem to be good enough. So there was sort of the right rhetoric, some ideas, some sort of framework in place, but very, very few specifics.
OK, thank you very much, Olivia Italy. We'll have full analysis throughout the rest of the show. And you're joining me now just after 4 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show here on GB News. We're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. As you've just heard, Kemi Badenoch has given a surprise speech on immigration. She has hit out at Labour's policies ahead of the new figures, which are due out tomorrow.
People know that if they can make it to the UK, they will be able to stay. We must end that.
So much to analyse on that. And another story that's got our attention, the convicted terrorist who helps to radicalise the Manchester Arena bomber, Salman Abedi, has been released from jail, but with his probation officers claiming he is a high risk and that he intends to commit terrorist-related offending. Is it time for the Justice Secretary to intervene and put him back behind bars? And BBC staff are being urged to wear Palestinian colours and, of course, scarves for a workplace day of action in support of Palestine tomorrow. But Jewish groups have slammed it as a shocking attack on Jews. And I'll be joined by a furious former BBC staffer who says the BBC should remain impartial. And that's all coming up in your next hour. Welcome to the show. Always a pleasure to have your company. So I think an astonishing speech given there by Kemi Badenoch, the new leader of the opposition, setting out ahead of figures released tomorrow. Immigration numbers expected to show a downturn as a consequence, she claims, of Conservative policies. Set out a bold new framework of solutions which weren't put in power during the past 14 years when they could have done something about it then. Is it too little, too late? Is it enough to tempt people to vote Conservative again? We'll have a full analysis of that incredible speech with our political editor, Chris Hope, who was there and asked the question, what is the immigration cap? Oh, we can't give you a firm figure, just a framework. Have we heard it all before? Let us know your views. GBNews.com, GBViews, your site, /your say, beg your pardon. Now let's have your headlines. I'm getting overexcited. It's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 4 o'clock. These are your headlines. Labour have no serious plan for ending illegal migration. That's the message from Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, who says we can no longer be naive on immigration. Giving a speech on migration, she said the Conservatives are to thank for a reduction in net immigration expected to be confirmed tomorrow. The Tory leader laid out her 5-point plan for tackling immigration while admitting her party has got it wrong in the past. Meanwhile, earlier today, the Conservative leader accused Sir Keir Starmer of making everything worse and dodging the Chancellor's pledge not to raise taxes or borrow more in the future. In a fiery exchange at Prime Minister's questions, Sir Keir Starmer hit back, saying the leader of the opposition wanted all the benefits of the budget without explaining how she'd pay for it.
2 weeks ago, she stood there and said that she wanted all the investment, all the benefits of the budget, but she didn't know how she was going to pay for it. I noticed that having come here criticising the national insurance rises over and over again, on Monday she admitted that she wouldn't reverse the position that we set out. Meanwhile, her science minister was saying he was going energetically to do the opposite. They really haven't got a clue what they're doing.
In response to roars from the Labour benches, Kemi Badenoch suggested Sir Keir Starmer should resign over what she described as Labour's lies.
If he wants to know what Conservatives would do, he should resign and find out. Until then, I'm the one asking the questions. There's a petition out there, 2 million people asking him to go. He's the one who doesn't know. He's the one who doesn't know how things work. It is not government that creates growth, Mr. Speaker. It is business.
In other news, roads and railways across the country have been hit by flooding and various stations evacuated as Storm Connell drenched southern England with up to half a month's rain. In London, King's Cross Station was forced to shut due to overcrowding, with commuters describing absolute mayhem at the station. Trains have also been unable to stop at platforms at Euston Underground Station. More than 90 flood warnings are still in place across the UK, including a severe alert for Billing Aquadrome in Northamptonshire, where flooding poses a danger to life. Now, a man from Bradford has been arrested on suspicion of stalking and harassment after videos of women on nights out in Manchester went viral. Greater Manchester Police say the footage shows women being followed, harassed and, in some cases, subjected to upskirting. It's believed to be the first arrest in the UK linked to videos accessible behind paywalls on social media platforms. Officers say the content has caused fear among women in the city, but extra patrols are in place to keep people safe over the festive season. Police are urging anyone affected to contact them. 6 people have been arrested in London as part of a counter-terrorism investigation into suspected activity linked to the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, a proscribed terrorist organisation. The subjects, aged between 23 and 62, were detained under the Terrorism Act, with officers conducting searches at 8 addresses across the city, including the Kurdish Community Centre in Haringey. Police say there's no immediate threat to the public, but the centre will remain closed for up to 2 weeks as the investigation continues. An increased police presence will remain in the area, with officers on hand to address any community concerns. And Israel, for the second time since a ceasefire with Hezbollah came into power, says its troops have fired shots in southern Lebanon. It comes as thousands of displaced residents in the south are returning home after 14 months of fighting. However, Israel's warning people not to return until forces have withdrawn from certain areas, which could take up to 2 months. Here, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer says the ceasefire is long overdue, calling for a political solution to end the crisis permanently. Meanwhile, aid organisations are calling for the truce to extend to Gaza, where fighting continues. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Martin.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, we've got so much to sink our teeth into this hour. Let's get stuck in. The leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, made a surprise announcement about 30 minutes ago ahead of new immigration figures which are due to be released tomorrow. She criticised Labour's plan to tackle illegal immigration and says the government has no serious plan. And this is what she had to say.
People know that if they can make it to the UK, they will be able to stay. We must end that. The result of Labour's policies will be consistently high illegal immigration throughout this Parliament and insufficient action on legal migration. But we are not in government now. We are the opposition, and our role now is to hold the government to account.
Well, where do we begin? Let's do our best to try and make sense of this. I'm now joined in the studio by GB News' political correspondent Olivia Utley. I'm delighted to say I'm also joined by the barrister and writer for his expert analysis of the legal side of things, Stephen Barrett. Welcome to the studio, both of you. Olivia, let's start with you, and we'll take a deep breath. I found that an astonishing speech. Basically, Kemi Badenoch and Chris Philp read out a litany of 14 years of Conservative failures. It literally was that. Nevertheless, we got a plan. This country is not a dormitory or a hotel. We must look after our country. And then we got onto the big solution. It's time for a new approach, we heard. If immigrants come in too quick, the things start to fray. Yeah, I think we knew that for quite some time. But let's get to the big points. The solutions are this. 1, a review of the ECHR and the Human Rights Act. 2, a strict numerical cap. 3, fully transparent costs on benefits and housing. 4, zero tolerance for foreign criminals, deporting them if necessary. 5, reviewing data on access to benefits. I share the public anger Kemi Badenoch says, my simple question to you, Olivia, is this. They had 14 years to do all of this, and haven't we heard all of this before?
Well, it does seem a little bit strange because this was billed as, you know, Kemi Badenoch explaining the Conservative Party's new policies on immigration as the party of opposition. But as you say, Martin, there wasn't really very much that was new in there. She said that she was going to review the ECHR. Well, Rishi Sunak said that before. David Cameron said that before. Boris Johnson said that before. Liz Truss said that before. Everyone's talked about reviewing it. What about actually pulling out of it? What is her view on that? Robert Jenrick said that he would pull out of it. Kemi Badenoch didn't want to go that far at that stage. Surely by now she has developed a sort of cogent decision one way or the other as to whether it would be Conservative policy to pull out of the ECHR. Then getting onto the strict numerical cap, you know, that will go down very well with lots and lots of voters. It'll certainly go down well with lots of Conservative Party members. But when she was asked by our very own Chris Hope what that strict numerical cap would be, she was unable to give an answer. Again, to me, that seems quite baffling, partly because, you know, she does have quite a lot of time. She's got 5 years or so before the next general election. It would be quite easy for her. No one's really holding the Conservatives' feet to the fire on this at this stage. Perhaps she should have just said a number, but clearly she wants to be more careful than that. She wants to talk about a strategy. In fact, she said that she would lay out the plan for immigration by the next election. Seems quite unambitious, given again that the next election is sort of 5 years away. In very Kemi style, there was a lot of kind of opposition by vibe, as people are calling it, i.e. sort of talking up these big lines, saying that Britain's not a dormitory or a hotel, saying that she understands the public anger. And I think that does sort of resonate with people. But to have so few specifics, you know, 7 months actually after the general election, seems a bit strange.
OK, Olivia, thank you very much. Now, Stephen Barrett, before we come to you, I'm going straight over now to GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope, who was at that announcement from Kemi Badenoch and, in fact, fired a question. Chris Hope, the first question that anybody was going to ask who was a sensible journalist, that's you, was, OK, so you said a firm cap on numbers. You said, OK, so what's the cap? And she said, we haven't got a figure. Astonishing.
Yes, Martin. I mean, I think, to be fair to Kemi Badenoch, she's been there barely a month and she's looking towards an election in 4 years, 5 years' time. They want to have a complete review of how they got into this mess. I was quite direct in my question. I think we've got a clip on it now. I think the problem this party has got is no one trusts them on immigration. Here's what I had to ask them.
There, you got it wrong on immigration. Chris Phillips said we can't trust Labour on immigration, but why on earth should voters trust either of you two or your entire party for completely cocking up controlling net migration for the past 14 years? Why would you say today, for example, that the firm cap, will be fewer than 100,000 arrivals a year?
What we have set out today is a framework for how we're going to be carrying out our immigration policy and how we are going to be holding Labour to account. It's not good enough just to complain about what they're doing. We have to explain why it is the wrong way of going about things. But you asked, why should people trust us? To earn back trust, you need to acknowledge where you got things wrong. And we are acknowledging today that while we may have tried, we did not deliver. We brought in a points-based system, which I personally thought was going to only allow skilled migrants in, and instead it allowed a lot of people at low incomes and with dependents. So we are going to change that.
Kemi Badenoch there saying we're going to change that, but frankly they've had 14 years and half of that period we're outside of the European Union, certainly at the back end of the final 3 or 4 years formally outside the EU, and that was a choice made by ministers, not Kemi Badenoch so much, but certainly colleagues of hers in Parliament, to allow these big numbers to come through to tackle skill shortages. They are at least identifying the problem that so many readers and viewers of GB News talk to us about, but what will the answers be is a speech for me strong on vibes, not very strong on policy, and that could be the problem. It'll get her over the line, I think, over the next few weeks and months. And tomorrow is a huge day with ONS figures, Office of National Statistics figures dropping with the annual net migration figures to June. It's likely to show that these changes brought in by James Cleverly, the former Home Secretary, in November last year, when those first figures came out with the following year far higher, they look like they have maybe brought net migration down by a third or as much as a half. But with the Tory party, how can this how can voters trust them on migration? They failed through all those elections, 2010, 2015, 17, 19, saying they would bring net migration down to below 100,000, and then in the end they said we'll control it without a number on it. I think this firm cap has to work. We are going to see how they're going to get there, though, Martin. They will look at that. There'll be a firm numerical cap. There'll be transparency on the impact of migration and how they're going to control it, and also look at the issue of citizenship, requiring people to have a better English and respect the values of this country, and also a wider piece on illegal migration. Looks like they want to go towards some form of Rwanda-type scheme. It's a start, but only a start.
Yeah, thank you there, Chris Hope. I'm asking the best questions in journalism. Thanks for joining us here on GB News. And let's continue this conversation now. Back in the studio, Stephen Barrett, waiting patiently in the wings, listening to all of that. And I wanted to ask you once again, a review of leaving the ECHR, a review of the Human Rights Act. That means they'll look at it and not make their minds up either way, doesn't it?
I think it's an awful lot like when your mum and dad say that they'll consider getting a puppy. And I think that is probably the issue that they have. I don't know if Kenny got herself into a blind alley during the leadership election where she refused to leave the ECHR. And I don't know if she's clinging to it just because she thinks it helped her. My professional opinion is that we cannot fix immigration without leaving the ECHR. If, therefore, fixing immigration becomes the pressing political question of your era, you're going to have to leave the ECHR. I don't see how there's really a choice. This is a monumentally unpopular government, and that's because it's trying to just do what it wants and ignore the people. Well, you can't do that in a democracy. In a democracy, you actually have to listen to the people. You haven't got any choice. I never understood why this phrase populist became an insult. That you literally are supposed to do what the people want. And if the people want immigration cut, and it looks as though they do, and the feeling is not going anywhere, then you're going to have to leave the ECHR.
And Stephen, Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, read out a litany of statistics. 8 cities the size of Liverpool, 64% think immigration is too high. 120,000 new homes need to be built every year just to satisfy those coming in. Over 1 million people cannot speak English at all. In some London boroughs, 73% of children don't speak English. 68% earn less than the median wage, all of which means they cost the taxpayer more than they put back in. And I was just thinking there, Stephen Barrett, that is a litany of failures conducted on your watch. And so back to that question. If taking back control, that phrase again, truly is about the ECHR, is the only option a binary referendum on this? It's time to get out of it before we can take back control, actually, once and for all.
It's an interesting question. We could have a referendum on it. I mean, we didn't have a referendum to join it. I'm not sure it's that important. I think as long as it's a manifesto pledge and the party with the manifesto pledge wins the election, I'd be perfectly content with that. I wouldn't be content with rejoining the EU without a referendum, because I think that's become associated with referendums in a way that the ECHR hasn't. And I distinguish the two of them apart from each other. But you could have a referendum on it if you wanted to. Part of the problem is that it has become very fashionable in particularly London circles to believe certain things are inimically good. And they believe the ECHR is inimicably good. They think it's just morally good. They think that they're morally superior if they support the ECHR. It is just an office building in Strasbourg staffed with, a bunch of foreign legal academics who don't necessarily know our country, don't necessarily care about our country, and are making some rather abstract decisions. And it probably would be better to not have that as the supreme legal authority in your country if you want your country to be governed well.
Do you think, final question to you, they've got the appetite for the battle to leave the ECHR, or is this why they're saying, we'll review it? I mean, have they actually got the guts to, in effect, go nuclear and allow their critics to say, oh, you'd be in the same camp as Belarus, you'd be in the same camp as Vladimir Putin?
Well, I'm a constitutionalist and I believe in and support the Constitution of the UK. We have first past the post for a reason. I think if they haven't got the stomach for this, then I'm afraid their party will probably die. That's what happens.
Stephen Barrett, a friend of the show, writer, thank you very, very much. And Olivia Utley, thank you very much for joining us in the studio. Experts analysis of so much to take in. Of course, we'll be covering this throughout the rest of the show. Really is an astonishing amount of information to take in. But look, Let's have a deep breath and move on, because it's time now for our biggest and greatest Great British Giveaway this year, and your chance to win 50 grand in tax-free cash. That's the biggest cash prize that we've ever given away here at GB News, and it could be yours. Here's the details you need to win that whopping, juicy 50 grand tax-free cash.
It's our festive treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £50,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest ever Great British giveaway. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements? Or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion? For your chance to win £50,000 cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good luck with that. Now, coming up, another astonishing story. The convicted terrorist who helped to radicalise the Manchester Arena bomber, Salman Abedi, has been released from jail, but with his probation officers claiming he is still a high risk and he intended to commit terrorist-related offending. Is it time for the Justice Secretary to put him back behind bars where he belongs? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
A Tesco store on a Scottish island has defied locals by ignoring pleas to stay closed on Sundays.
Tesco's has said that no member of staff in Stornoway would be forced to work on a Sunday and that it had received a significant amount of positive reaction to its plans.
Well, let's talk now to the Minister of the Reformed Presbyterian Church, Reverend Kenneth Stewart. Good morning to you, Reverend Stewart. You're trying to keep Sunday special, and if Tesco are going to open up, that means it won't be quite as special for you.
Well, yes, good morning and thanks for having me on. Yes, Tesco, for some reason, they claim it's not economic advantage, but for some reason they've decided to go against hundreds of years of tradition on this island and the deeply held religious convictions of many, many people, including, of course, their own customers who are really grieved by this decision. We come obviously from the standpoint that a day of rest is effectively mandatory. It's a human right, along with the other 10 commandments which have undergirded our moral and legal fabric in society. It actually enshrines the human right to a day of rest. And of course, in the UK, that's been eroded for many, many years. Incidentally, it's still far more respected on the continent. But for us here, the Sabbath or the day of rest has been very, very important. It's not just what we do, it's who we are. And for some reason, Tesco have decided just to go against that.
And Reverend Stewart, we were actually talking about this earlier, how in European countries, I mean, even in France, which is a secular country, still very few shops will open on a Sunday.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, you didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back. It's 4 on an action-packed afternoon with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now, after 120 years, the Vauxhall car plant in Luton has sadly closed, with owners Stellantis claiming it was killed by net zero. Labour's Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds called it a dark day for Luton. But was it the punitive green targets of Labour and, of course, the Tories before them that sadly and finally turned off the lights and put over 1,100 people's jobs at risk? Well, as a result of the government, it's announced that it will review now its eco rules on electric vehicle sales following the backlash over this factory closure, which has been linked to sluggish EV sales and the financial penalties imposed on manufacturers if those EV sales make up less than 22% of vehicle sales. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the director of the Climate Media Coalition, Donncha McCarthy. Donncha, always a pleasure to have your company in the studio. Now, I know you're an advocate of net zero targets. I know you want us to be driving electric vehicles. The problem is the public don't agree, and we've just closed one of our proudest crown and the jewel automotive plants in Luton. 1,100 jobs down the toilet. This country is being sacrificed on the altar of net zero.
Well, I agree that today's announcement is a sad announcement. I think Stellantis are being slightly economical with the truth. They said it's partially due to the green mandate. But what's actually happening, in my view, in Luton, is that they've got a plant that's producing fossil fuel cars, and they're proposing to add EV vans to it. They decided it's more efficient to have a factory in France producing fossil fuel cars and one Ellesmere port producing EV vans. But there is a problem with the Tory-imposed requirement mandates.
That's because people don't want electric cars.
Actually, that's not quite true.
All the people who want them have already got them, and the fact of the matter is sales are down in Britain, across Europe. Volkswagen, BMW, Porsche, now Vauxhall, all of them are being told to make cars that they can't sell.
That's not true. The fact is, actually, in Britain, we have gone from 15% of sales to 18% of sales. It's gone up by 20% this year. Wait. So
commercial fleets.
Total car sales this year are up by 20%. They wanted the target set by the Tory government was 22%. So we're short of that, and so therefore 6 of the 9 car manufacturers have exceeded the minimum requirement under the regulations. 3 have not. So manufacturers want the switch to EV. So all we need to do is 3 things.
They don't. They're being told to do it, or they'll be fined. The market doesn't want it.
The SMMT, the Society of Manufacturers, want to switch to EV. They're invested already £12 billion in the transition. They are invested in this.
But they've been told to do that, or they'll close them down.
And I'm saying that the car sales for EVs have gone through the roof compared to 6 years ago. 1 in 1,000 cars, Martin, 6 years ago were an EV. Now 1 in 5 being sold is an EV. It's going through the roof.
But that's because we're being fined to use our diesel cars. We're being taxed off the road. I've got a diesel car. It costs me £12.50 to drive around London. I don't want to be forced to buy a new car. I can't afford a new car. Millions of people can't afford new cars.
98% of cars in London are not actually polluting cars.
Yeah, because they're already clean enough. We don't need to be electric.
We should do 3 things, because the manufacturers have asked the government to act. We should remove the unfair tax on EV car owners who don't have a car park. If you park your car on the road or in a council estate, you have to pay 20% VAT.
Yes.
That should be removed down to same as a private car householder, 5%. That would help poorer drivers buy an EV.
On that, I agree.
Second, they should remove the 20% VAT on new EVs. It's mad. If we want to help the manufacturers, taxing new EVs
That's what Ford
at 20% is mad.
Ford want that.
And the third thing I think we should do is actually help poorer drivers make the switch, because the AA said...
Well, they don't want to switch.
No,
they got a car they love and like, and they can't afford to switch.
I said help. And I say the reason why is because the AA say it's around £500 cheaper, including ownership, to run an EV car. Why shouldn't poor drivers get that advantage? The reason why they can't is that buying a new EV at the moment is normally more expensive. So we need to help them get over that ridge so they benefit from the £500 a year.
And that will cost the taxpayer even more, because that will mean subsidies or grants or scrappy schemes.
No, it means actually getting rid of the tax, VAT tax that you agree with.
That don't even want to change their cars. Donncha McCarthy, you're a great sport. We'll have to leave it there. But seriously, 1,100 jobs down the Swanee. We seriously don't we need
650,000 green jobs on the other side?
Where are they? Haven't seen any of them yet, mate.
The Office of National Statistics said there are already 650,000. £12.5 billion pounds invested in the North.
You must believe in Santa. We've got
Visit the North.
We have to leave it there, Donica. Thank you very, very much, because there's still loads to come between now and 5 o'clock, including a report undertaken by the charity Age UK has found that 37 people of elderly people will struggle to manage without their winter fuel payments this year. We'll discuss that next with a GB News viewer pensioner. But first, here's your headlines, and it's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. These are your headlines at 4:30. Labour have no serious plan for ending illegal migration. That's the message from Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, who says we can no longer be naive on immigration. Giving a speech today, she said the Conservatives are to thank for a reduction in net immigration expected to be confirmed tomorrow. The Tory leader laid out her 5-point plan for tackling immigration while admitting her party got it wrong in the past.
People know that if they can make it to the UK, they will be able to stay. We must end that. The result of Labour's policies will be consistently high illegal immigration throughout this Parliament and insufficient action on legal migration. But we are not in government now. We are the opposition, and our role now is to hold the government to account.
6 people have been arrested in London as part of a counter-terrorism investigation into suspected activity linked to the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, a proscribed terrorist organisation. The suspects, aged between 23 and 62, were detained under the Terrorism Act, with officers conducting searches at 8 addresses across the city, including the Kurdish Community Centre in Haringey. Police say there's no immediate threat to the public, but the centre will remain closed for up to 2 weeks as the investigation continues. An increased police presence will remain in the area, with officers on hand to address any community concerns. Israel, for the second time since a ceasefire with Hezbollah came into force, says its troops have fired shots in southern Lebanon. It comes as thousands of displaced residents in the south are returning home after 14 months of fighting. However, Israel's warning people not to return until its forces have withdrawn from certain areas, which could take up to 2 months. Here, Prime Minister Keir Starmer says the ceasefire is long overdue, calling for a political solution to end the crisis permanently. Meanwhile, aid organisations are calling for the truce to extend to Gaza, where fighting continues. And 3 former Conservative Prime Ministers, Boris Johnson, Theresa May and Liz Truss, have come out against the assisted dying bill ahead of Friday's Commons vote. Opposition is growing, with more than 1,000 Anglican clergy warning the legislation is a dangerous threat to society. A cross-party so-called wrecking amendment could see the bill scrapped before it even reaches a vote. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer, who once supported changing the law, is yet to reveal how he will vote. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Afternoon. It's going to be a cold one tonight, some frost around and also some thick fog patches too, but most places are going to be dry. We saw some wet weather last night, of course, from Storm Connell. That is now clearing away into the Netherlands. It was the Dutch that named that weather system. It's going to bring them some very lively conditions over the next few hours. Behind it, a few showers just drifting down the eastern side of England across northeast Scotland, but most areas dry, clear skies and cold air in place. So we are going to see a pretty extensive frost and some dense patches of fog for Northern Ireland, Wales, particularly East Wales, the Midlands, southeast of England and northwest England. Temperatures dip to freezing, even in towns and cities. Rural areas well below. May avoid a frost in the far southwest, a bit more cloud spilling it here and the breeze picking up, so maybe not as cold here, but elsewhere some dense patches of fog and a frosty old start. That fog likely to linger through the morning rush hour as well, so just be aware of that. Through the morning, the fog will be clearing in Northern Ireland as the breeze starts to pick up here. Much of Scotland having a sparkling start to the day. Plenty of sunshine, but it will be a cold and frosty start. Towns and cities down to -2, -3. Rural spots -7, -8, maybe as low as -9. Through the day, the cloud will continue to thicken over Wales, southwest England, a little bit of light rain and drizzle here and there, and then some wetter weather working into Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, most places dry. Many areas seeing some sunny spells, but a few places likely to see the mist and the fog stick around. If that happens, temperatures may not get much above freezing, but generally 4, 5, 6 in the east. It is slowly turning milder further west. It won't be as cold on Friday morning, but again, could be some fog patches around first thing. Generally a dry and a bright day across these eastern areas, but it'll still feel quite chilly with that breeze. Further west, it's turning milder, but it's also, as you can see, turning wetter as the thick cloud and the outbreaks of rain come into western Scotland, Northern Ireland and western parts of England and Wales. But temperatures by then back into double digits.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Still issues in Scotland, Dumfries and Galloway, where through East Riggs the A75 remains closed off and queuing at the scene there of a serious collision by the Chapel Cross turn-off. Westbound M62 delays as well this afternoon, a lane shut from Rochdale to Haywood, junction 20 to 19 heavy going at the scene of a collision. Now between the Murley roundabout in Dorset and the Canford Bottom roundabout in Winbourne, the A31 closed both ways and queuing. There's emergency repairs. Flooding still affecting many parts of the country this afternoon. The Blackwater Valley route in Aldershot is blocked, as is Thomas Lewis Way in Southampton. Delays of up to an hour on DFDS ferries between Dover and Calais and Dover and Dunkirk, and disruptions to flights at Belfast City Airport. Again, it's due to the poor weather. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:37 with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now, today, 2 men have been jailed for sexually abusing 6 young boys over 2 decades ago in Rochdale. 74-year-old David Marsh has been jailed for 27 years after being convicted of 27 counts of indecent assault, 1 count of rape and 1 of attempted rape on young boys in the late 1980s and the 1990s. 72-year-old Whitehead has been jailed for 7 years for 6 counts of indecent assault. Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has the background to this astonishing case.
David Marsh and Anthony Whitehead, between them found guilty on 35 counts of historic sexual offences. In the late 80s and early 90s, they preyed on young and vulnerable boys in Rochdale. In 2019, over 3 decades later, one of these victims came forward and the investigation into the horrific crimes of these 2 men began.
Right, David, so at the minute you're under arrest.
These were 2 very normal, working-class men who had families, who went about the day-to-day business. They very clearly and evidently had a dark side. The investigation of non-recent child sexual abuse is very difficult. From the very fact that it is non-recent. We have no forensic evidence, we have no CCTV, we have very few witnesses around at that time that we would manage to trace. So we are entirely reliant on the survivors giving their evidence.
When he was arrested on rape and sexual assault charges in 2020, officers searched David Marsh's home. There, they uncovered shocking footage of him preying on younger boys in Thailand. Officers say this has been a vital piece of evidence in getting the guilty convictions. But for Greater Manchester Police, they believe there may still be more crimes for them to uncover in this case. 6 victims, 35 guilty verdicts, but you believe that might not be the end?
Yeah, I certainly believe that. Marsh, without a doubt, I do believe there are further victims, and also for Whitehead. It just shows you, unfortunately, about the amount of males out there who are willing to abuse children when they get the opportunity to do so.
The police say the victims of Marsh and Whitehead were all male, from dysfunctional families. Often they had run away from home and had no one to look after them. As a result, it's taken years of suffering in silence before any of them felt ready to speak out.
If a female doesn't speak out at the time of something happening, she'll take round about 6-7 years to speak out, whereas males take in excess of 20 years to speak out. And I think that gives us some indication of how difficult it is for men to say something. We've got to get better at that.
Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Well, it's a heartbreaking story, and we're joined now by Sophie Reaper, who was in Manchester Crown Court. Sophie, an incredible journey for justice spanning some 5 decades, and today justice was finally served. Tell us more about this incredible case.
Well, I think one thing that's really shocking is that both David Marsh and Anthony Whitehead had jobs, had families, seemed to be leading fairly ordinary lives. But last month, a jury here at this court found them guilty of 35 sexual offences relating to boys under the age of 16 from the late 80s to the early 90s. Now, Marsh, he was charged with the majority of those, 29 out of the 35, in fact, 27 indecent assault, 1 of rape and 1 of attempted rape. And as a result, here today, a judge has sentenced him to 27 years. He was told as well that 18 of those years he will be serving those in prison as a minimum. Then turning to Whitehead, the judge sentenced him for 7 years for 6 counts of indecent assault, and he will serve a minimum of 4 years and 8 months of those in prison before he'll be considered to serve the rest out on licence. Now, earlier this morning here at court, we heard victim impact statements from some of the boys, now of course they'll be grown men, who were abused by Marsh and Whitehead. They spoke of how they were groomed, how they turned to drugs to try and forget the abuse they'd been subjected to, how for many of them they'd considered, in fact some had even attempted to take their own life. We heard from one victim who chose to read out his own statement himself. He spoke of how when he was a child living on the streets of Rochdale he met Marsh, and how Marsh would buy him cigarettes, alcohol, food, but he said Marsh expected something in return for these gifts. Little did I know what he wanted was to sexually abuse me. He also went on to describe how, as a result of this abuse, he became addicted to heroin and how he launched into a life of crime. He said, Marsh has completely ruined my life. He has smashed it into a million pieces. So, some incredibly harrowing stories to come out of this, but just to reiterate, Marsh today has been sentenced to 27 years, Whitehead has been sentenced to 7.
So, Reaper, a lot of that is very, very difficult to take in. It really, really is. But I just want to commend those lads that stood up in any grooming case, in the grooming gangs of young working class girls we've seen, and these lads, casting long, long shadows over their lives. But by standing up and getting justice like this, Sophie, they're bigger men than Marsh and Whitehead will ever be. Well done to those lads for finally getting justice. Sophie Reaper, thank you very, very much there for giving us that account from Manchester Crown Court. God, those cases are so hard, man. Let's move on to something else. A report undertaken by the charity Age UK has found that 37% of elderly people will struggle to manage without their winter fuel payments this year. And this comes as elderly people say that their energy bills have become a source of real fear and antagonism. And according to the report, 1 in 10 say they would have to reduce the number of hot meals that they even eat. It's another story I find utterly heartbreaking, but look, we've got to talk about it. Talk about now, discussed by GB News viewer Chris Roberts. Chris, thank you for joining us. The temperatures are getting colder, the bills are going up. Chris, tell us about how this winter fuel allowance cut has impacted you, and are you concerned about the winter of discontent ahead?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's what you said earlier on was absolutely right. The reports have been absolutely correct. Both my wife and I are of pensionable age, and obviously we both lost the winter fuel allowance, and it will have an impact on us. I mean, quite frankly, we've both got health problems as well. As you can tell, I have a problem in breathing sometimes, and the impact will be noticeable. Okay, we can cope as a pair, but it will have an impact on us. We do rely on it for heating, and quite frankly, I've done a bit of research onto the statistics. I know you can say that, you know, there are lies, damn lies and statistics, but the government uses that anyway. I've come up with some figures here which may or may not be of interest, but basically there are going to be about 10 million pensioners who will lose this £200 a year and a year, yes. But I've done some calculations that if one of those pensioners who loses £200 is taken to hospital, to get an ambulance to A&E is about £417. The cost at A&E is about £287, and the cost per day at a general hospital ward is £351. So for one pensioner to be in hospital for one day is going to cost the government, if you like, or the NHS, over £1,000. Now, how does that compute with that pensioner maybe saving £200 with their winter fuel allowance and costing the NHS £1,000? That's just for one day. Now, if you take even a small percentage, say 1% of those pensioners who aren't getting the winter fuel allowance, if you just take that 1% and say that they have to go to hospital just for a day because they can't keep warm, that's going to cost over the government over £100 million. Where's the sense in that? It wasn't thought out. This cancelling, to me, okay, that yes, the King and the Queen don't need £200 because they're pensioners. But on the other hand, you know, the 10 million pensioners, you're not going to tell me that all of those aren't on the cusp where they lose it, Chris, because they're £2 a week. Income is just too high.
I'm really, really sorry. We have to leave it there. We've simply run out of time. But I just want to say to you and your missus, you know, please stay warm, please stay safe, please stay in touch with us here at GB News. And I wish you the very, very best. And thank you so much for coming on the show today. Mind how you go. Thank you. Now, coming up, BBC staff are urged to wear Palestinian colours and even scarves for a workplace day of action tomorrow. Now, of course, Jewish groups have slammed it as a shocking attack on Jews. That's next with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
My next guest's book will certainly provoke you. Lord Sarch's book, Orgasm, probes 21 such ideas, chapter by chapter, in a stimulating reading experience, covering subjects from geopolitics and etiquette to the economy and the afterlife. Maurice Sarchi argues that rigorous thinking can create a blissful mental experience.
Well, the title is Orgasm, and I try to investigate the question of whether it's possible for there to be an orgasm of the mind which is equal in bliss to a physical orgasm. That's very interesting. And theoretically, the way that arises, I'll finish. Theoretically, the way that arises is by addressing conflicting ideas and then for there to be a revelation of true wisdom. That's the purpose of the book. And I think you can sum up British politics completely in 2 sentences. You'll understand very well, Michael. Conservatives are efficient but cruel. Labour is caring but incompetent. So you can see there that if you have a situation in which the Conservative Party turns out to be, in people's opinion, inefficient and cruel, well, then you're likely to have a very bad election result, which is exactly what we just did. And why?
So you have quite a lot to say to Kemi Badenoch. I mean, the first thing you'd say to her would be, read my book, please, I suppose.
Well, that's absolutely the first thing. It's a perfect Christmas present for her to give. as I was saying. So that's number one. So after she's done that, well, then her level of wisdom, which I'm sure is already very high, will be greatly increased, and she'll be able to address the complex, provocative, controversial issues aired in this book.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, will your furry friend need a new passport to travel? Well, this could become a reality as new regulations say. If you're bringing a pet from Northern Ireland into the UK or vice versa, then you will need a passport for your dog or your cat or even your ferret, I'm told. And the member of the House of Lords, Baroness Kate Hoey, has expressed her concerns. She wants to throw a vote later on tonight, and Kate Hoey joins me in the studio now. So, of course, the first question I ask you here, Kate Hoey, is this surely shows us that we didn't really ever get Brexit done.
Well, I think that's the real crucial issue, because a lot of people say, oh, this is all because of Brexit. Northern Ireland was left in the European Union, and because Northern Ireland was left in the European Union, they now have 300 areas of law, and one of these is to do with pet movements. The protocol which came in, if you remember, made all sorts of suggestions about what was going to happen. It was so draconian that there was a grace period. Now the government and the EU have come back with the regulations, which are slightly better, but particularly for people from GB to Northern Ireland, is going to mean a huge amount of bureaucracy. Absolutely ridiculous.
As I understand it, Baroness, so this even could extend to guide dogs for the blind.
Well, originally we were told, the Secretary of State said, and other people said, guide dogs would be exempted. We've now, of course, discovered that guide dogs leave it. If you go with your guide dog to Northern Ireland, either to visit family, and remember, there's a lot of people, family in Northern Ireland, or as a tourist, you will need to go through, you will need to get, obviously, a microchip, which is fine. Everybody has that anyway. Then you need to fill in another form, and you get a passport, and then you will be checked at the border, the Irish Sea border, dividing our own country, and then you have to sign. This is really important. You have to sign that you're not going to go on into the Republic of Ireland. Now, that means the tourist who comes over to Northern Ireland and then decides to drive on over and will have to go through other checks and get more regulations. So we've ended up supposedly stopping a border, actually having a border for a pet. It's just nonsense.
So it shows that there's a border, and Brexit hasn't had any teeth in that respect. So you're planning to cause a bit of trouble tonight in the Lords. Tell us about that.
Well, we have a statutory instrument, which is a very weird sounding name, but that means we get a chance to vote on it or discuss it. I've put down a regret motion. Normally in the Lords we wouldn't, we would just discuss it, but I do feel quite angry about this, and I think I've been approached by the Kennel Club, who are very upset about the fact that if your dog has an exemption from having a chip, there's nothing in the bill that says they can travel. So there's all sorts of problems. So I think I'm going to push a vote. Now, there'll be a lot of people not there, and also, the government clearly will win it. But I think it's sending a message, this is not going to go away. There's going to be more and more things coming through. And I think what I want is your viewers and people in Great Britain to understand, because it affects GB to Northern Ireland more than it does Northern Ireland to GB. They have to get onto their MP and say, this is just nonsense. Start standing up to the EU.
We have to leave it there. Baroness Kate Hoey, thank you, and good luck with that vote tonight, and thanks for all the work that you do. Now, plenty more to come in the next hour, including that immigration announcement from the Tory leader Kemi Badenoch, who has said that she will review the membership of the ECHR, whatever that means. I'm Austin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel. Now's your weather with Alex Deakin.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon. It's going to be a cold one tonight. Some frost around and also some thick fog patches too. But most places are going to be dry. We saw some wet weather last night, of course, from Storm Connell. That is now clearing away into the Netherlands. It was the Dutch that named that weather system. It's going to bring them some very lively conditions over the next few hours. Behind it, a few showers just drifting down the eastern side of England across northeast Scotland, but most areas dry, clear skies and cold air in place. So we are going to see a pretty extensive frost and some dense patches of fog for Northern Ireland, Wales, particularly East Wales, the Midlands, southeast of England and northwest England. As temperatures dip to freezing, even in towns and cities, rural areas well below. May avoid a frost in the far southwest, a bit more cloud spilling it here and the breeze picking up, so maybe not as cold here, but elsewhere some dense patches of fog and a frosty old start. That fog likely to linger through the morning rush hour as well, so just be aware of that. Through the morning, the fog will be clearing in Northern Ireland as the breeze starts to pick up here. Much of Scotland having a sparkling start to the day. Plenty of sunshine, but it will be a cold and frosty start. Towns and cities down to -2, -3. Rural spots -7, -8, maybe as low as -9. Through the day, the cloud will continue to thicken over Wales, southwest England. A little bit of light rain and drizzle here and there, and then some wetter weather working into Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, most places dry. Many areas seeing some sunny spells, but a few places likely to see the mist and the fog stick around. If that happens, temperatures may not get much above freezing, but generally 4, 5, 6 in the east. It is slowly turning milder further west. It won't be as cold on Friday morning, but again, could be some fog patches around first thing. Generally a dry and a bright day across these eastern areas, but it'll still feel quite chilly with that breeze. Further west, it's turning milder, but it's also, as you can see, turning wetter as the thick cloud and the outbreaks of rain come into western Scotland, Northern Ireland and western parts of England and Wales. But temperatures by then back into double digits.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
I'm Jules Buckley. Hello again. Good afternoon. To Orrell in Greater Manchester, the Orrell Road, the A577 by Orrell Post is closed between there and the M58. Queues forming at the scene of a collision. Now the earlier bump westbound M62 is cleared away from Rochdale. 20, though still slow toward 19 at Haywood. Long queues in the roadworks. Clockwise M25, St Albans 22 struggling through towards Potters Bar 24. Anti-clock queuing in the cones before Wisley at 10. Now flooding means the Blackwater Valley route in Aldershot by the Ash Junction is blocked and slow. London bound M20 in Kent, Junction 3 through towards the Brands Hatch Circuit at 2. Lane 1's coned off, there's a broken down car. And Thomas Lewis Way in Southampton is closed by the Horseshoe Bridge. There's flooding there, so currently no way through.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
It's our festive treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £50,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest ever Great British giveaway. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements, or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion. For your chance to win £50,000 cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A very, very good afternoon to you. It's 5 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show here on GB News. We're broadcasting for you live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. On today's show, Kemi Badenoch has given a surprise speech on immigration, and she's hit out at Labour's policies ahead of the new figures, and of course they're due out tomorrow.
People know that if they can make it to the UK, they will be able to stay. We must end that.
And a full analysis of that coming up. Our next story, the convicted terrorist who helped to radicalise the Manchester Arena bomber, Salman Abedi, has been released from jail, but with his probation officers claiming he is a high risk and that he still intended to commit terrorist-related offending as well as helping Brits join the Islamic State. Is it time for the Justice Secretary to intervene and put him back behind bars where he belongs? And BBC staff are being urged to wear Palestinian colours and, of course, scarves for a workplace day of action supporting Palestine, and that's tomorrow. But Jewish groups have slammed it as a shocking attack on Jews, and I'll be joined by a furious former BBC staffer who says the BBC should remain journalistically impartial. And that's all coming up in your next hour. Britain is not a dormitory or a hotel. Those are the words of Kemi Badenoch about an hour and a half ago, setting out a new vision for the Tories' plan on immigration. They're doing that, of course, because the figures are out tomorrow, expected to show a significant decrease in immigration, because finally, after years and years of being told by the electorate, they clamped down on care worker visas, on student visas, on the spouses of those coming over, on both of the above. But it was too little, too late, and they were booted out of power. A new plan was laid out today, and stick around for full analysis of it, because I'll tell you what, I think I've heard it all before, and didn't they have 14 years in power to get all of this sorted and spectacularly fail? Get in touch, gbnews.com/your say. But now's your headlines, and here's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 5 o'clock. These are your headlines. Labour have no serious plan for ending illegal migration. That's a message from Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, who says we can no longer be naive. Giving a speech a short while ago, she said the Conservatives are to thank for a reduction in net immigration expected to be confirmed tomorrow. The Tory leader laid out her 5-point plan for tackling immigration while admitting her party got it wrong in the past.
People know that if they can make it to the UK, they will be able to stay. We must end that. The result of Labour's policies will be consistently high illegal immigration throughout this Parliament and insufficient action on legal migration. But we are not in government now. We are the opposition, and our role now is to hold the government to account.
Meanwhile, earlier today, the Conservative leader accused Sir Keir Starmer of making everything worse and dodging the Chancellor's pledge not to raise taxes or borrow more in the future. In a fiery exchange at Prime Minister's questions, Sir Keir Starmer hit back, saying the Leader of the Opposition wanted all the benefits of the budget without explaining how she'd pay for it.
2 weeks ago, she stood there and said that she wanted all the investment, all the benefits of the budget, but she didn't know how she was going to pay for it. I noticed that, having come here criticising the national insurance rises over and over again, on Monday she admitted that she wouldn't reverse the position that we set out. Meanwhile, her science minister was saying he was going energetically to do the opposite. They really haven't got a clue what they're doing.
In response to roars from the Labour benches, Kemi Badenoch suggested Sir Keir Starmer should resign over what she described as Labour's lies.
If he wants to know what Conservatives would do, he should resign and find out. Until then, I'm the one asking the questions. There's a petition out there, 2 million people asking him to go. He's the one who doesn't know. He's the one who doesn't know how things work. It is not government that creates growth, Mr. Speaker. It is business.
In other news, 6 people have been arrested in London as part of a counter-terrorism investigation into suspected activity linked to the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or KKK, a proscribed terrorist organisation. The suspects, aged between 23 and 62, were detained under the Terrorism Act, with officers conducting searches at 8 addresses across the city, including the Kurdish Community Centre in Haringey. Police say there's no immediate threat to the public, but the centre will remain closed for up to 2 weeks as the investigation continues. An increased police presence will remain in the area, with officers on hand to address any community concerns. Now, 2 men have been sentenced for sexually abusing 6 young boys over 2 decades in Rochdale and Manchester in the 1980s and the 1990s. Our GB News North West reporter Sophie Reaper is outside the Manchester Crown Court, where the trial concluded today.
Both David Marsh and Anthony Whitehead seem to live fairly ordinary lives. But last month, a jury here found them guilty of 35 sexual offences between them, relating to boys under the age of 16 from the late 80s to the early 90s. Now, David Marsh was charged with the majority of those, 29 out of the 35, 27 of indecent assault, 1 of rape and 1 of attempted rape. And as a result, a judge here today sentenced him to 27 years, 18 of which he will serve in prison. Turning to Anthony Whitehead, who was charged with 6 counts of indecent assault, he sentenced him to 7 years.
And roads and railways across the country have been hit by flooding and various stations evacuated as Storm Connell drenched southern England with up to half a month's rain. In London, King's Cross Station was forced to shut due to overcrowding, with commuters describing absolute mayhem at the station. Trains have also been unable to stop at platforms at Euston Underground Station. More than 82 flood warnings are still in place across the UK, including a severe danger to life notice for the River Nene in Northamptonshire, as well as one in Wales. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Martin.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sophia. Now let's get cracking, because the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, says Labour have no serious plan for ending illegal migration. Well, the Tories didn't either. And this comes as she gave a speech earlier on about migration, admitting the party had made mistakes on this pressing matter.
People know that if they can make it to the UK, they will be able to stay. We must end that. The result of Labour's policies will be consistently high illegal immigration throughout this Parliament and insufficient action on legal migration. But we are not in government now. We are the opposition, and our role now is to hold the government to account.
Well, let's talk about this now, because I'm delighted to say I'm joined in the studio by GB News political editor Christopher Hope, who was at that speech, called Too Sweet, of course, because the immigration figures are dropping tomorrow. They're expected to be down. So in many senses, Kemi Badenoch was basically saying it was the Tories what done it. Now, I watched that speech in real time, and all I kept doing was shouting at the television, hang on a minute, you lot had 14 years to do this and you didn't achieve anything. You were in the room, tell us more.
Martin, I'm looking at your furious notes there. They look quite terrifying, what you've done there. Exactly. Now, what we're going to see tomorrow is the annual figure to June last year, so really the final year on the Tory watch. It will show probably a couple, 300, 400, maybe as much as 100 net migration coming here. That is far more than the numbers which this Tory party pledged would do. We've heard reaction already from Nigel Farage to that speech. He's told GB News the Tory party has broken their promises on immigration after the 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019 manifestos. Why on earth would I or anyone else believe them now? And that is part of the problem, this issue of trust. We heard a record of failure from both Chris Philp, who's the Shadow Home Secretary, and Kemi Badenoch, of course, the Tory leader, on how they've got this wrong. And yet vibes, ideas, no actual policies to get it right. We did hear there will be a strict numerical cap. There'll be transparency about how we approach the immigration issue. Fresh news on citizenship, forcing people to buy into British culture, perhaps, and more measures to try and deter illegal migration. But at the heart of it, I asked a question that was probably on the tip of your tongue. Why have you failed for so long? And here's my question to Kemi Badenoch.
There
you got it wrong on immigration. Chris Phillips said we can't trust Labour on immigration, but why on earth should voters trust either of you two or your entire party for completely cocking up controlling net migration for the past 14 years? Why would you say today, for example, that the firm cap will be fewer than 100,000 arrivals a year?
What we have set out today is a framework for how we're going to be carrying out our immigration policy and how we are going to be holding Labour to account. It's not good enough just to complain about what they're doing. We have to explain why it is the wrong way of going about things. But you asked, why should people trust us? To earn back trust, you need to acknowledge where you got things wrong. And we are acknowledging today that while we may have tried, we did not deliver. We brought in a points-based system, which I personally thought was going to only allow skilled migrants in, and instead it allowed a lot of people at low incomes and with dependents. So we are going to change that.
Interesting answer. I said to her, why have you cocked up for so long? Why should people believe you? I think many GB News viewers and listeners will agree. Well, they'll give them a chance and let's see how they get to the next election. She said there, very interestingly, she felt that only skilled migrants were coming and she was a business secretary. The problem with migration is it sits across all these different sectors. Yeah. The health service wants more care workers, business wants skilled workers. There's the DEFRA piece about people to pick fruit and deal with the crops. And all these people pitch in, don't they, trying to get, why can't we have our extra staff here? And that's why I think it can be quite siloed, the approach towards migration. And that's what we heard there from Kemi Badenoch. But stepping back, her government failed on this. The question now is, will Labour do any better?
Chris Philp, the new Shadow Home Secretary, read out a series of statements which I felt could have come straight from the lips of the Labour Party. A litany of failures. 8 cities the size of Liverpool, he said, have come to Britain. 64% think immigration is too high. We need to build 120,000 new homes every year just to service immigration. Over 1 million people cannot speak English at all. 73% of some school children in East London don't even speak English. 68% earn less than the median wage, which means they're a net drain on the taxpayer. Chris, that is a litany of failures that happened on the Conservative watch.
And perhaps that's why they're getting in their response early, because the figures out tomorrow from the ONS, there's a big day tomorrow for immigration and statistics, will be the last year of the Tory government. And they do recognise they've made a mistake here. I think what's interesting is she has moved on the issue of a permanent cap, a numerical cap. He started off through that long leadership campaign at the beginning of September, saying she thought the numbers wouldn't work to be firm on them. But by the end of that period, after all those questions, including eventually being grilled by GB News and also the GB News debate, she came round to the fact that a cap is required. But being honest about that cap is so important, because you'll have all sorts of drains, people trying to get around that. Talk to the Treasury. Treasury, of course, is quite pro-net migration. The forecast, by the way, from the OBR is net 320,000 a year between now and the end of the decade. That's 1.5 million people arriving here. And what is the government's target for new housing? 1.5 million new homes. What is the point of this?
All serviced simply by immigration. Chris Hope, stick with us. Let's get a Labour perspective on this now. I'm joined by the Labour spokesperson, great friend of the show, James Matthewson. So, James, you probably heard what we've got to say here. Not a great deal of being convinced by what the Conservatives say they're going to do. But let's put this to you. We can't trust Labour on immigration, Kemi Badenoch said.
Yeah, funny that, isn't it, really? I mean, if we're going to be giving anybody a chance to get ahead of this, it would be the new government, the new Labour government, who were in power for the first time, in 14 years. So you would think you would give them the opportunity to get ahead of it before you start listening to people who the electorate just booted out because they were sick of over issues like this. Now, look, Martin, you and I disagree on immigration on many issues, but we can do it agreeably. When it comes to things like this, the Labour Party still acknowledges that people in the country are concerned, and they seem to be taking this seriously. It's not something that I myself see as a priority for myself in Britain, nor do many other people on the left of politics in generally. But however, it needs to be listened to, to be taken seriously. But I do think the Tories trying to make this some kind of central idea of their campaign and platform moving forward isn't just too little too late. It completely suggests that they have no other idea what to talk about, because immigration is the issue of the last 10 years. We will be moving forward from that. whether you like it or not, the government will be putting things in place and it will be doing something. And then the conversation, as it does with the media, moves on to other things. So immigration, yes, it's been talked about for a long time now. It's been the headlines for a long time, but it won't be for much longer. So I do not understand why Kemi Badenoch is trying to wrestle it back from Nigel Farage when on the right of British politics, he seems to be the voice who talks about it.
Well, I've got to say, James, I think you're wrong on that. I think immigration will still be a huge issue right to the next election. But listen, I'm joined in the studio by Chris Hope, our political editor. He's got a question for you.
But James, do you think Labour gets immigration, gets the pressure on local services, understands the problem, or does it just see it as a racist issue, one they don't want to go near?
No, I think it does see it, Chris. It sees it as a problem. And I mean, many people in the Labour Party at the top echelons of the party have the same concerns other people do in the country. You know, a lot of their politics is a lot more impacted by that. However, the Labour Party has to balance, as you know, so many different factions, so many different stakeholders, if you like to put it in a polite way. We've got many different stakeholders who have different opinions on different things. And if the Labour Party is seen to spend too long talking purely about things like immigration, then it looks like it's just answering the narrative set by the right in British politics. And it's not carving its own path, which, to be honest, you know, people like myself are already frustrated that the party isn't doing that. It's not seemingly putting its own values ahead in government at the moment. It needs the chance to do that. But before it can do that, it needs to put immigration to bed for once and for all.
OK, well, James Mathieson, thank you very much for joining us. And let's see if we get any policies from the Labour Party. Good news out tomorrow, but that'd be good news that happened on the Conservative Watch. Now, let's get back to the studio, because, Chris, you were gesturing towards me there. You got some breaking news for us.
That's right. During PMQs there, we heard from Tahir Ali, who asked the PM, Keir Starmer, whether he would commit to introducing measures to prohibit the desecration of all religious texts and prophets of the Abrahamic religion. That means basically a form of blasphemy law to stop people desecrating Christian or Jewish or Islam texts. Now, the PM didn't give a clear answer. He said that the desecrators were awful. He said they should be condemned across the House. He also said we are committed to tackling all forms of hatred and division, including, of course, Islamophobia. It's Islamophobia month right now. Now, in that Q&A with Kemi Badenoch, she was asked that question, would you bring in a blasphemy law? She said no. And I can reveal now on GB News that also Labour, and we understand, are not considering a blasphemy law. So a development there today.
A common sense solution there. We have no blasphemy laws in Britain. The separation of church from the state happened a long, long time ago. And many people are fearful of the fact that actually a blasphemy law could be a de facto way of not allowing anybody to criticise religions, and especially the Muslim faith, particularly around Islamism.
Exactly. Just very briefly, there are nearly 80 countries with blasphemy laws, but in 2008 the UK repealed the blasphemy law here, so you could criticise Christian beliefs and texts, and in Scotland back in 2024. So it has moved on. It looks like we're not going backwards on this.
And there are two Labour MPs there who were calling for blasphemy laws to be introduced in Britain. It's an astonishing thing.
But we have clarity
to happen.
now.
Clarity, that won't happen. A welcome bit of common sense. I think we could all get. Chris Hope, thank you very much for bringing us that breaking news line. No blasphemy laws, at least for now, in the United Kingdom. Thank you, Chris Hope. Excellent. It's time now for our biggest and greatest Great British giveaway this year, and your chance to win 50 grand in tax-free cash. It's the biggest cash prize we've ever given away, and it could be yours. And here's the details that you need to win that whopping, juicy 50 grand in cash.
It's our festive treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £50,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest ever Great British giveaway. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements, or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion. For your chance to win £50,000 cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Yeah, best of British with that. And coming up, a so-called wrecking amendment could derail the assisted dying bill before it even gets to a vote. Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader of Reform, who's furious at this disgraceful attempt to prevent democracy, joins me next. I'll also get his take on Kemi Badenoch's new plans for immigration control. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Millions are struggling to stay warm with the wet weather, the cost of living and, of course, cuts to fuel payments.
Yes, winter is fast approaching, so it's crucial to find cost-effective ways to save on your energy expenses whilst staying reasonably warm.
So joining us to provide advice on heating your home, or at least staying warm somehow, is one of the leading voices on lowering energy bills, Nick Miles. And you are very welcome in here this morning. I mean, a lot of people say, well, in the olden days, you just used to put on an extra jumper. But actually, it's more serious than that, isn't it? What is the best way, the most cost-effective way to keep your home warm?
Some of the bigger things is we need to do more things on insulating our properties, but actually sometimes, it can be simple things like turning down a thermostat. Those that have got the luxury of being able to afford energy bills and keep their homes on the thermostat a bit too high. If you just turn it down by one simple degree, as long as you keep it between 18 and 22 degrees, can save up to 5 to 10% of your energy bill. So that's a kind of a very simple way of doing things, but it can be other little tips and tricks you can do as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I always get it when people say about this, but like 18 degrees is not warm for a house.
No, and it's twofold actually. It's that kind of relative temperature, but also it's the kind of drafts and things you have in your house. So it's the comfort factor. So what we have a lot of old properties in our country. You've got some 8 million hard-to-treat properties built before World War II that have got poor insulation, but also very, very drafty. So it's the temperature and it's the kind of the draftiness of them that kind of keeps us uncomfortable.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, and I'm joined now in the studio by the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, and I'm still with our political editor, Chris Hope. Mr Tice, I'd like to get your reaction, if we could, to Kemi Badenoch's speech earlier on today, around about an hour and a half ago. I'm trying to preempt the fact immigration is expected to be down in tomorrow's announcement in the morning, and she gave a range of solutions, as she called them, that the Conservative Party would do. Quickly, a review of the ECHR and the Human Rights Act, a strict numerical cap. Chris Hope has the how many, she wouldn't say. A fully transparent costs on benefits and housing, zero tolerance for foreign criminals, and a review of the data on access to benefits. This country is not a dormitory or a hotel, she said. We must look after it. What's your response to that?
Waffle, waffle, waffle. It's just the same old boring,
untrustworthy garbage that we've been hearing from the Tories for literally years, and for them to have the temerity and the cheek to talk about hotels, for heaven's sake, when it's because of their failures that we've had hundreds of hotels full of illegal migrants because they couldn't process people properly. The number tomorrow, I think, will be around the net number for the year ended June. I think will be well over 500,000 people. It is still a multiple of what they promised, which was tens of thousands. She won't put a number on it. She's actually pro-mass immigration. She can't be trusted on this issue, and people will see right through what she's standing for. I think people recognise only Reform UK can be trusted on immigration.
But isn't she being realistic? She's trying to say it's very hard to work out where these numbers come from. Let's look at the numbers. Let me finish. You haven't been in government. She has been. She thought by the issue, she thought she was controlling one part of it with skilled visas, when she wasn't aware, apparently, that other numbers coming through the health route and elsewhere. Government is complicated. People getting here is complicated.
It's not.
Government is hard. And you've got easy solutions which aren't actually practical.
It's actually very simple. If she's in government and she claims she's an engineer that's competent, then she should have studied the form, she should have studied the policies that were put in place by Priti Patel, which was basically open borders, mass low-skilled immigration, and including mass dependencies on dependents for students and the like. All of this was completely predictable.
What's your policy? Is it one in, one out?
Our policy basically is net zero immigration. It's the only net zero we do want.
That will never work, because you know jolly well that the complaints about a shortage of people getting in.
All these people bleating and whining, saying it'll never work. Do you know what? Maybe actually you have an ambition and you go out and achieve it. And you do it with people who've run businesses, made things happen and get stuff done. That's who we are at Reform UK. It will work. You've just got to have courage.
Are you worried, though? She's going after your votes for this speech.
Of course she is. She's going after our votes. But our votes are not going back to her because they know they've heard it all before. Can't be trusted.
OK, excellent stuff. And those numbers out, we think, tomorrow about 9:30 a.m. Satish, you messaged me earlier on today because, of course, there's a potential wrecking amendment coming through today. This, of course, is to the assisted dying bill. You've been on my show before. You're in favour of this bill. What's the latest? Is there an attempt to derail this?
It's a very big debate. Everybody is quite energised by it. Hopefully it's a respectful debate. But people now want this to be discussed and voted on the floor of the House of Commons. There's an amendment that's been put forward, essentially to kick the whole thing into the long grass with a long independent review, no timescale, and if that amendment is called by the Speaker, which is no guarantee, and the Speaker decides, then that would be voted on first. And those who are wavering, who are not sure, they might say the easy thing to do is to kick it into the long grass, so you don't have to force people to make the actual vote, although this is just the first vote. So I hope the Speaker doesn't call this amendment, but if he does, then I think you're potentially seeing democracy being prevented at the end of a long period. And I think that would be really damaging for trust in democracy. So I hope that we carry on as planned. This amendment's not called.
It's worth pointing out that Nigel Farage doesn't agree with your position on this.
And that's
it's a free vote.
It's a free vote, and I respect everybody's opinion. I understand why those who might have a different view on this. I just think, having wound the nation up on this issue, the idea that MPs think it would be a good idea now to not have a definitive vote at the second reading and to kick it into the long grass, I think shows how out of touch some of these MPs really are.
This amendment is not doing that, is it? What it's doing is it's saying there's not been sufficient scrutiny and there should be a review and public consultation. Because it's a private member's bill...
That's called kicking it into the long grass, Chris.
No, because it's a private member's bill, there's no attempt by the government to look at the impact of this legislation. You are voting blind as MPs. This surely is an adult way to do... It's the biggest social change in 50 years.
And this is just the second reading, as you know full well, before it goes to committee for months and months, then to the House of Lords, then back to the Commons. The idea that this is being rushed is utter twaddle. It's just the beginning of a process. You cannot wind a nation up to have a debate and then say, oh, do you know what? The last minute, we've cancelled it. Disgraceful.
It's the wrong way round, though, isn't it? You're not even looking at the impact. Can judges cope with having to sign off all these warrants to allow someone to kill themselves? Can GPs cope?
That's why we've got
They can't cope, probably, or we're not sure they can cope, at least. Why not look into it first and then, as an MP, vote with full knowledge?
Look, we've got months to debate and discuss and look at this and amend it as people see fit. And it's back to the same point we were just talking about. If you don't try something, you never make progress. If other states and nations can do it, we pride ourselves on being supposedly the greatest legal system in the world. If we can't design appropriate safeguards, frankly, who are we?
Now, Richard Tice, in a plot twist few saw coming, the whole thing could be derailed because the European Court of Human Rights might not allow it anyway. Who'd have thought Nigel Farage will get his way because the ECHR won't even like it? Nigel might actually think the ECHR is finally a good thing on this point.
Well, there you are. Look, if you can't beat them, sometimes you've got to use them and join them. It's like with me and school fees. It may be that actually the school fees, the VAT on school fees, gets crushed by the ECHR. So there we go.
OK, now, expecting, quick look ahead if we can, back to our first point about immigration tomorrow. It's the big moment of our time. And one thing that Kemi Badenoch kept saying is we cannot trust Labour on immigration, both legal and illegal. You're sniggering away.
These are the people that said they would contain immigration to tens of thousands and then deliberately let it soar to a net 750,000 people without any planning, any preparation, any consultation or agreement from the British people. And they're now saying they should be trusted on bringing the numbers down. I mean, seriously, is it April Fool's Day?
But you're chortling away in the corner there, Richard Tice. But the truth is that she is trying to get to grips with the problem, which has defeated all governments going back into the 90s. There's been a problem here for many governments.
They created the problem, Chris.
She is trying to
Someone who creates a problem can't be trusted to solve it. It's as basic as that.
You may find it difficult in government. I mean,
I won't find it difficult at all.
Background, but
I won't find it very difficult
harder.
at all. Like other nations do it, you set a clear policy, and you say, for example, we want net zero immigration. Yes, we should look at healthcare, but you know what? Let's train our own people. Let's make work pay in the United Kingdom.
But on that point, do you believe, I suspect I know the answer, do you think that things will get any better or not under the Labour government?
No, is the answer. I mean, the numbers will be way too high. They keep saying they want to build 1.5 million new homes. That will only deal with the net immigration, so that won't help the existing crisis. We've got to get to net zero immigration, stop illegal immigration, and then we can start to make some progress.
And in fact, an astonishing point that Chris Philp actually made himself, as if he was signing his own death warrant. He said, we need to build 120,000 new homes every year just to cope with immigration.
It's about 1 every 2 minutes, just to cope with the numbers coming in at north of 500,000 people per annum. But it's not doable.
Don't you think we're seeing rare honesty here from senior politicians trying to say there's a problem here? One question I thought was fascinating there.
And who triggered that debate? We did.
Well, yeah, you walked into us. But what I thought areas were quite interesting was the issue of staffing at the Home Office. Kemi Badenoch said, why do people leave there and go and work for charities? You almost need to sort of grill them on their views on migration before they arrive to make sure it's the right people leading our institutions.
Like
How do you deal with that cultural issue in the Home Office?
Very simple. Sometimes a building is so knackered, you're better to demolish it than try and refurbish it. It's the same with the Home Office. You need a whole new Department of Immigration that is staffed by believers in the cause of closing,
How do you get
controlling
How do you get
borders.
thousands of these people?
First, I tell you what, if I'm in charge of recruitment, or anybody at Reform UK, we would get them, we would vet them and make it work, and I have no qualms about that whatsoever. That's what the British people want.
Richard Tice, Deputy Leader, Reform UK, of course, the MP for Boston Skegness. Have to leave it there. Chris Hope, as ever. Great sparring, great fun, wonderful stuff. Loads more still to come to you now at 6 o'clock on the show, including BBC staff are being urged, of course they are, to wear Palestinian colours and even scarves for a workplace day of action. And that's tomorrow. But Jewish groups have slammed it as a shocking attack on Jews. I'll be joined by BBC staffer who's absolutely livid about it. But first, here's your headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. It's 5:33. These are your headlines. Labour have no serious plan for ending illegal migration. That's a message from Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, who says we can no longer be naive. Giving a speech a short while ago, she said the Conservatives are to thank for a reduction in net immigration expected to be confirmed tomorrow. The Tory leader laid out her 5-point plan for tackling immigration while admitting her party got it wrong in the past.
People know that if they can make it to the UK, they will be able to stay. We must end that. The result of Labour's policies will be consistently high illegal immigration throughout this Parliament and insufficient action on legal migration. But we are not in government now. We are the opposition, and our role now is to hold the government to account.
A man from Bradford has been arrested on suspicion of stalking and harassment after videos of women on nights out in Manchester went viral. Greater Manchester Police say the footage shows women being followed, harassed and in some cases subjected to upskirting. It's believed to be the first arrest in the UK linked to the videos accessible behind paywalls on social media platforms. Officers say the content has caused fear among women in the city, but extra patrols are in place to keep people safe over the festive season. Police are urging anyone affected to contact them. Israel, for the second time since a ceasefire with Hezbollah came into force, says its troops have fired shots in southern Lebanon. It comes as thousands of displaced residents in the south are returning home after 14 months of fighting. However, Israel's warning people not to return until its forces have withdrawn from certain areas, which could take up to 2 months. Here, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer says the ceasefire is long overdue, calling for a political solution to end the crisis permanently. Meanwhile, aid organisations are calling for the truce to extend to Gaza, where fighting continues. Roads and railways across the country have been hit by flooding and various stations evacuated as Storm Connell drenched southern England with up to half a month's rain. In London, King's Cross Station was forced to shut due to overcrowding, with commuters describing absolute mayhem at the station. Trains have also been unable to stop at platforms at Euston Underground Station. More than 82 flood warnings are still in place across the UK, including a severe danger to life notice for the River Nene in Northamptonshire, as well as one in Wales. Now, some breaking news. Several people nominated to roles in Donald Trump's incoming cabinet and administration have been targeted by bomb threats and swatting. That's according to a spokesperson for the US president-elect. It's understood the threats were made on Tuesday night and this morning, and law enforcement acted quickly to ensure the safety of those targeted. We will bring you more as we get it. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2682 and €1.1983. The price of gold is £2,081.76 per ounce. And the FTSE 100s closed the day at 8,274 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Afternoon. It's going to be a cold one tonight. Some frost around and also some thick fog patches too. But most places are going to be dry. We saw some wet weather last night, of course, from Storm Connell. That is now clearing away into the Netherlands. It was the Dutch that named that weather system. It's going to bring them some very lively conditions over the next few hours. Behind it, a few showers just drifting down the eastern side of England across northeast Scotland, but most areas dry, clear skies and cold air in place. So we are going to see a pretty extensive frost and some dense patches of fog for Northern Ireland, Wales, particularly East Wales, the Midlands, southeast of England and northwest England. As temperatures dip to freezing, even in towns and cities, rural areas well below. May avoid a frost in the far southwest, a bit more cloud spilling it here and the breeze picking up. So maybe not as cold here, but elsewhere, some dense patches of fog and a frosty old start. That fog likely to linger through the morning rush hour as well, so just be aware of that. Through the morning, the fog will be clearing in Northern Ireland as the breeze starts to pick up here. Much of Scotland having a sparkling start to the day. Plenty of sunshine, but it will be a cold and frosty start. Towns and cities down to -2, -3. Rural spots -7, -8, maybe as low as -9. Through the day, the cloud will continue to thicken over Wales, southwest England. A little bit of light rain and drizzle here and there, and then some wetter weather working into Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, most places dry. Many areas seeing some sunny spells, but a few places likely to see the mist and the fog stick around. If that happens, temperatures may not get much above freezing, but generally 4, 5, 6 in the east it is slowly turning milder further west. It won't be as cold on Friday morning, but again, could be some fog patches around first thing. Generally a dry and a bright day across these eastern areas, but it'll still feel quite chilly with that breeze. Further west, it's turning milder, but it's also, as you can see, turning wetter as the thick cloud and the outbreaks of rain come into western Scotland, Northern Ireland and western parts of England and Wales. But temperatures by then back into double digits.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Big problems continue on the Belfast-bound carriageway of the M1 to the east of Dungannon. The motorway is partly blocked. A lorry just caught fire just after junction 13 at the Ardres turnoff. Many roads remain closed because of flooding in the west and in the south of England. Let's start in Worcestershire to the east of Tenbury Wells. The A443 is being described as impassable between Lindridge and Eardiston. The Blackwater Valley route, the A331 in Hampshire, that still blocks, of course, near Aldershot at the Ash Junction because of the flooding. And in Southampton city centre, Thomas Lewis Way, the A335 closed. In Kent on the M20, the inside lane of Free closed London bound from the M26 to Rootham. A car has broken down in the inside lane and District Line trains are suspended in London, Barking to Upminster due to emergency engineering works at Upminster. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:41 with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News, Britain's news channel. Now, the BBC once again has sparked outrage, this time after its staff are being urged to wear Palestinian colours and, of course, even the keffiyeh scarf for a workplace day of action supporting Palestine. And that is tomorrow, that action day, and it's been organised by the Trades Union Congress to demand a ceasefire, like the listen to them, and the release of hostages, as well as the overall end of violence in Gaza. That's it. They'll all put down their weapons because the Trade Union Congress has spoken. And joining me now to discuss this is the ex-BBC journalist Danny Kelly, a man who channels common sense. Danny, the BBC has always seems to be taking the side of the Palestinians on this. They're getting political when they shouldn't really be getting involved. A lot of people say the Jewish groups have been calling this a cruel and unnecessary and shocking attack on Jews. What on earth's going on?
Well, the National Union of Journalists, it's a multi-pronged coordination and a day of, if you like, action. And the National Union Journalists, who represent thousands of BBC reporters all around the country, they're asking their members to go in with one of those Arabic scarves or maybe a Palestinian flag. And that's to actually show support and acknowledge over 130 Palestinian journalists and reporters and camera crew that Hamas, we've got to accept it's Hamas figures, that Hamas say have been killed reporting on this conflict. Now, what I find so frustrating about this, Martin, is that the optics of it are terrible. So you can be a National Union journalist member and you can walk in tomorrow with an Arabic scarf and ostensibly you're there and you're wearing this sort of gear because you acknowledge that over 130 reporters, camera people, journalists have been killed. But the thing is, it forces you to pick a side. And if I was to go to work tomorrow in Birmingham and I didn't want to wear any of the scarves or the Palestinian flags, then automatically I'm assumed to be on the other side. And I think it's unhelpful. And I think if the BBC, don't forget, Martin, trust in the BBC is at a historic all-time low. And all of a sudden, for the licence fee payers, 160-odd nicker a year, it would be galling, sticking in the craw to see people walking into work, basically supporting Palestine, because that's how it looks. Whether they're supporting and acknowledging the 130-odd people who've been killed is one thing, but to wear the Palestinian flag or an Arabic scarf, that just tells you which side they're on, and I think the optics are appalling.
And Danny Kelly, right from the beginning of this conflict, of course, I mean, how long did it take before the BBC actually admitted that Hamas were a terrorist organisation? They're a prescribed international terrorist organisation, and they definitely are in the United Kingdom. Fact. they are a terrorist organisation. The BBC had to be forced to take that point. And Danny, this once again, as you say, underlines the point that they are taking a side. And it's not the BBC's job to take a side. Back in the old days, they were the bastion of impartiality. Danny Kelly, what went wrong?
Well, I think the overwhelming Liberal staffing over recent years has gone wrong. And the fact that, unlike commercial organisations, Martin, the BBC is funded by billions of pounds worth of licence fee payers for, I think, 7 or 8 years at a time over each charter. So they have the luxury that they don't necessarily need to win over audiences. They have this luxury of an unlimited almost access to public funds. And with that, with the recruitment of Liberal managers and the recruitment of Liberal staff, they're biased. And everyone has bias, Martin. You, me, your panellists today, we all have bias. The problem with the BBC, generally speaking, is that bias will seep out on air. A very quick example, if there's an anti-Brexit story in the news, I'm going back 4 years, or a pro-Remain story in the news, they'll always have picked the pro-Remain story. And that's the BBC in a nutshell.
And anything that was positive was, despite Brexit, there's been some good news. Look, Danny, before you go, we've got a statement to read out from the TUC, and a spokesman told us this. The day of action is focused on the TUC's call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire and the release of all hostages and political prisoners. We are advising trade union members to undertake the action respectfully and to discuss with colleagues what action is best suited to their workplace. Danny Kelly, why on earth would a union be getting involved in the BBC? Why on earth would BBC employees be taking this side like this? And what will this say if you're a Jewish member of staff and you work for the BBC?
It goes back to picking sides. If I was a Jewish member of staff, I would feel so incredibly unwelcome, and I would feel that people were like daggers, eyes searing through the back of my head. I would feel so uncomfortable working at the BBC. And listen, my in-laws are Jews, Martin, and even though I have a strong connection to the Jewish faith, I'm not a Jew, but I certainly wouldn't wear any Palestinian headgear or any Palestinian flags on my lapel. What the NUJ or the BBC should have come up with is something more neutral, maybe like a silver microphone or a silver camera, to signify that you are supporting, because this is what it's all about, 130 odd Palestinian journalists who've been killed, not wearing the blooming green, red, black and white Palestinian flag on your lapel. It's awful. The optics are terrible. And if I was a Jew, I would be made to feel most unwelcome at the BBC.
Danny Kelly, always a bastion of common sense. Thank you very much, Miles Sun, for coming on the show. Always a pleasure. You take care. Mind how you go. Now, don't go anywhere, because I'll be very shortly. I'll be getting all of your same messages, your big stories of the day. Your messages are coming to me, and I'll read some out. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Maria, potholes, the bane of everybody that uses the road, whether you're a car driver or a cyclist, as a cyclist or even worse. How have we got into this situation where our roads are in such a bad state?
Well, part of it is to do with actually our climate. In somewhere like, say, Sweden, like the snow will fall on the ground, it will stay there for months. Whereas here we've got what's called a freeze-thaw climate, where the water comes down, then we might have a cold snap and it freezes, and the water within the pothole will then expand and make the pothole bigger. Then we might have a mild spell, and then that process repeats. So, we do actually need extra funding to acknowledge the fact that, we just live in a climate where we're sort of particularly vulnerable to potholes.
Why? I mean, the fact that this happens, these weather conditions happen, is no great surprise to anybody. Why has the problem been ignored for so long?
I think what's happened is we've had short-term funding. So it's like, oh, there's a pothole, let's patch it up. Oh, there's another one, let's patch it up. But the patches aren't actually really that strong, so then they break down again. So, really what we need is to have roads completely resurfaced. and then they'll just be pothole free for a very long time. And that really is how funding should be. That's the direction funding should go in, as opposed to just sort of like dribs and drabs here and there.
Do you think this government are going to be good for the motorist, or is there indeed a war on the motorist still?
The different parties come in and they've all got different policies that they wheel out, then they cancel the policies, and then there's so much lack of transparency. Like, for example, with the pothole issue, sometimes the government, whichever government is in office, will do some big showboating about how they're going to give X amount of potholes, and you still think that sounds really good.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 10 to 6 with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now, 2 men have today finally been jailed for sexually abusing 6 young boys over 2 decades ago in Rochdale. 74-year-old David Marsh has been jailed for 27 years after being convicted of 27 counts of indecent assault and 1 count of rape and 1 of attempted rape on young boys in the late 1980s and 1990s. 72-year-old Whitehead has been jailed for 7 years for 6 counts of indecent assault. And our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has the background to this astonishing case.
David Marsh and Anthony Whitehead, between them found guilty on 35 counts of historic sexual offences. In the late 80s and early 90s, they preyed on young and vulnerable boys in Rochdale. In 2019, over 3 decades later, one of these victims came forward and the investigation into the horrific crimes of these 2 men began.
Right, David, so at the minute you're under arrest.
These were 2 very normal working class men who had families who went about the day-to-day business. They very clearly and evidently had a dark side. The investigation of non-recent child sexual abuse is very difficult. From the very fact that it is non-recent. We have no forensic evidence, we have no CCTV, we have very few witnesses around at that time that we would manage to trace. So we are entirely reliant on the survivors giving their evidence.
When he was arrested on rape and sexual assault charges in 2020, officers searched David Marsh's home. There, they uncovered shocking footage of him preying on younger boys in Thailand. Officers say this has been a vital piece of evidence in getting the guilty convictions. But for Greater Manchester Police, they believe there may still be more crimes for them to uncover in this case. 6 victims, 35 guilty verdicts, but you believe that might not be the end?
Yeah, I certainly believe that. Marsh, without a doubt, I do believe there are further victims, and also for Whitehead. It just shows you, unfortunately, about the amount of males out there who are willing to abuse children when they get the opportunity to do so.
The police say the victims of Marsh and Whitehead were all male, from dysfunctional families. Often they had run away from home and had no one to look after them. As a result, it's taken years of suffering in silence before any of them felt ready to speak out.
If a female doesn't speak out at the time of something happening, she'll take round about 6-7 years to speak out, whereas males take in excess of 20 years to speak out. And I think that gives us some indication of how difficult it is for men to say something. We've got to get better at that.
Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Well done to those two young lads for having the bravery to stand up and get justice. 5 decades in the coming, but well done for finally seeing those two monsters, Marsh and Whitehead, jailed. Now, that's it from me today, but not to worry, because up next is Jubes & Co, the fiercest debate show on television. That'll be unmissable. And at 7, of course, it's Farage. What a day in politics has been. Loads to talk about on Kemi Badenoch's immigration plan. Have you heard it all before? See you again soon. It's time for your weather now with Alex Deakin. Have a great evening.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon. It's going to be a cold one tonight. Some frost around and also some thick fog patches too. But most places are going to be dry. We saw some wet weather last night, of course, from Storm Connell. That is now clearing away into the Netherlands. It was the Dutch that named that weather system. It's going to bring them some very lively conditions over the next few hours. Behind it, a few showers just drifting down the eastern side of England across northeast Scotland, but most areas dry, clear skies and cold air in place. So we are going to see a pretty extensive frost and some dense patches of fog for Northern Ireland, Wales, particularly East Wales, the Midlands, southeast of England and northwest England. As temperatures dip to freezing, even in towns and cities, rural areas well below. May avoid a frost in the far southwest, a bit more cloud spilling it here and the breeze picking up. So maybe not as cold here, but elsewhere, some dense patches of fog and a frosty old start. That fog likely to linger through the morning rush hour as well, so just be aware of that. Through the morning, the fog will be clearing in Northern Ireland as the breeze starts to pick up here. Much of Scotland having a sparkling start to the day. Plenty of sunshine, but it will be a cold and frosty start. Towns and cities down to -2, -3. Rural spots -7, -8, maybe as low as -9. Through the day, the cloud will continue to thicken over Wales, southwest England. A little bit of light rain and drizzle here and there, and then some wetter weather working into Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, most places dry. Many areas seeing some sunny spells, but a few places likely to see the mist and the fog stick around. If that happens, temperatures may not get much above freezing, but generally 4, 5, 6 in the east. It is slowly turning milder further west. It won't be as cold on Friday morning, but again, could be some fog patches around first thing. Generally a dry and a bright day across these eastern areas, but it'll still feel quite chilly with that breeze. Further west, it's turning milder, but it's also, as you can see, turning wetter as the thick cloud and the outbreaks of rain come into western Scotland, Northern Ireland and western parts of England and Wales. But temperatures by then back into double digits.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Major problems on the M60 in Greater Manchester. The motorway is blocked anti-clockwise. Junction 5, the Prince's Parkway exit, at the scene of an accident, and the M11 is being held in Essex, northbound as you head away from London, just before the M25, following a collision. Long queues all the way back onto the North Circular. Heading out of London on the M1, the entry slip road is closed to Junction 2, the Barnet bypass, because of debris on the carriageway. In South London at Wallington, Maneth Road remains shut for a third day for the A237 after a storm damaged a building near Park Road on Sunday morning. In Kent, the Margate Road, the A254 at Ramsgate remains closed following an accident near Newington Road. And on London Underground, well, emergency engineering works at Upminster means no Hammersmith and City Line Liverpool Street to Barking. Severe delays on the District Line Barking to Upminster. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Imagine getting the call to tell you that you've won £50,000 in tax-free cash, our biggest cash prize of the year.
Oh my God.
That's a big surprise.
Oh my God. This is amazing.
I'm in shock. That is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
For your chance to win £50,000 cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30.